UCNRLF/IL M3MIL Reese Library University of California. Deceive J** and the KELIG10N of Zoroaster considered in connection with archaic monotheism. By R. Brown, Esq., FSA foot reprinted from the Journal of the Transactions of the Victoria Institute, or Philosophical Society of Great Britain. London, D. Bogue, St. Martin's Place, Trafalgar Square. Edinburgh, J. Thin. Dublin, G. Herbert. Paris, Galignani and Co. All rights reserved. CV The Religion of Zoroaster, Stev of the University/of 1. The Classics on the Date of Zoroaster. One of the greatest, yet at the same time most shadowy, figures in the history of the earlier religion of the world, is that of Zoroaster the Magian, to whom after times have united in ascribing high and mysterious doctrine in combination with occult and wondrous lore. His actual historical existence was not doubted by the Greek and Latin writers, but the time when he lived was only conjectured. Thus, Agathias, writing about AD 576, observes that the Persians in his day stated that Zoroaster lived in the time of Hystaspes, who, by a not unnatural error, was regarded as identical with the father of the first Darius, and the historian adds that whenever he lived he was the Persian prophet and master of the magic rites. Pliny has preserved several traditional incidents xtonique tield ledwias thriasto or so as tatri, such as star-like praise of F that he mysterious laughed on the day of his birth, a circumstance which those who connect him with natural phenomena would probably regard as indicating the joyousness of the bright heaven or the dread exultation of the thunder god, and that he lived on cheese with great austerity for 20 years, a statement which reminds us of the traditional and mythical austerities of Hindu saints and divinities. After referring to the general consent of authorities that he was the inventor of magic, which Pliny judiciously observes was doubtless originally connected with the healing art, the Roman writer states that Eudoxos and Aristotle placed Zoroaster 6,000 years before the time of Plato, whilst Hermippos the philosopher, BC 250, who, of all the Greeks, most deeply studied Zoroastrianism, and who wrote a work upon it, now lost, entitled Perimagon, placed the age of Zoroaster 5,000 years. Before the Trojan War with the state Plutarch, in, to pe Zoroastrianism hiasm tagvialnua.ble tractate, Masudi, agrees when the Arabian referring historian, AD 950, assigns Zoroaster a date about BC 600, a computation probably connected with the view that places him in the period of the later Hystaspes. From these different opinions we gain at least one important fact, that in comparatively late times the people of the country in or near which he was said to have lived still connected him with an Hystaspes, Vishtaspa, who, in reality, was the Kava Vishtaspa, a friend of Zoroaster, who is mentioned in the Guthas. The name Magian, whence magic and magician, occurs in both our testaments. In the Old, the Rav Mag, or chief Magian, is mentioned amongst the Babylonian princes of Nebuchadnezzar at Jerusalem, whilst in the New it is recorded that Magians, Fidjat, came to worship the infant Jesus. In both cases the term implies not merely wise men but special experts belonging to a particular country. What, then, is the derivation and meaning of the word, which his 2. 24f History NATXXXVII. 49 J Ibid 7. 15 of Shelley, The Cloud, I Laugh as I Pass in Thunder. History NAT 11. 96 F Ibid XXX. 1, 2. Perry Island. JKOS. Sylvie Foot Jeremiah XXXIX. 3 TT St. Matthew 2. 1 is certainly not Semitic. The Aryan and Turanian families of language and others, have both the term claimed it. Magava thus, according to Hawks signifies one possessed of Maga, or power, i.e., spiritual or occult power, and the Magavas were the earliest followers of Zoroaster. Magavan, the possessor of riches is a common epithet of the Yedic Indra, and is also occasionally applied to Agni, the igneous principle. On the other hand, Sir H. C. Rawlinson and M. Lenormant regard Magism as non-Aryan in origin, but engrafted with an Aryan religion *. In this case the word must be Proto-Medic or Scythic, i.e. Turanian, and I should be inclined to connect it with the Akkadian Mach, very high / by M Supreme / Lenormant. We thus read Inanza Ikonkokdiam and Im Ng oft trat unsoluated very high. J. Whether, therefore, the term be of Aryan or Turanian origin, it signifies almost equally one exalted by the possession of wealth, of knowledge, or of power. 3. Is Zoroaster an historical personage? His name. According to Sir H. C. Rawlinson, Zoroaster was the personification of the old Harizionim of the Scythic race. Zarathustra or Thustra, the Persian, and Parsi Zerdasht, the Greek Zarastratas, Zoroasters, or Zoroastries, in his theory is Zara-Ishtar or the seed of Istaru, the celebrated Assyrian goddess of love, war, and the planet Venus, the zodiacal Virgo, and whose two phases, Istar of Nineveh and Istar of Arbela, reappear together in the Phoenician, plural, divinity Ashtaroth, the Greek Astarte. M. Darmstedter, who regards Zoroaster as one of the many bright powers of heaven who fight Nes in Danavile Mubstarevnetslo ess Starivmi Ignaestof Hay Pionirms of Dark Zarathustra is unknown. It is no fault of etymologies, one can count a score, and here is a 21st. And he proceeds to trace Jtarat Vat, it to a which Safganirvmi Ezarat Vioth o course Rechpio and Erdiadin to the Vedic, horses, / i.e. the sun. Zaratvat would thus mean red, or gold * Vidi Canon E. Allinson, Herodotus, I 346, ETSEQ, Ancient Monarchies 2. 348, Lenormant, Chaldean Magic, 218. F. Cuneiform Inscriptions of Western Asia, IR 60. J. Etudes sur quelques parties des syllabaires cuneiformes, 12. Notes on the Early History of Babylonia, 41, Vidi also Canon Rawlinson, Herodotus, I. 350 Assyrian, Zyru, Hebrew J&J. F. Istaru means goddess, Vidi Geosmith, Chaldean account of Genesis, 58. B2 color / and the entire name would be simply one of the 1,000 epithets of the bright hero * of the material heaven. Jaraoi Hog, again, connects old, and Uttara Ushtra, the name with the Sanskrit excellent, and points out that the superlative form Zarathustra Tima, the highest Zarathustra, assumes the existence of several contempi Osriniuro Uskaziafra, Tinazidrasapsu Rituohalakshenzet, Iramas would thus mean the word Dasturef does now. J. Hogg is perfectly convinced of the actual historical existence of, subsequently noticed, as Zorio Alizelt Yurk Antonid Nanergag arts the Gudha sayings and teaching of the great founder of the Parsi religion himself. He also points out that the sage's real or family name was Spidama, and that, according to the Pahlavi books, Aspidama was the ancestor of word Spidama was Zarathustra erroneously in the 9th rendered by Jibun Renro Tuafone. Hal Tye in which full title he has would been thus Foelo wet he be splatir morni t erosra. Atindida Hemas Actaes spiritual chief. Although it may for a moment appear somewhat paradoxical, yet the question of the actual historical existence of an individual Zoroaster but little affects the present investigation, for, just as we might have had Islamism and the Quran without a particular Muhammad, or have, as many think, an Ilias and an Odyssey without a particular Homer, so the existence of the Avesta and the Parsi religion is altogether independent of that of a particular Zoroaster, and yet, so far as my own individual opinion is concerned, I certainly agree declares, in his with Hogg and with excellent little history Mr. Yaws, when he of Persia, I do not doubt that Zoroaster was truly a teacher and reformer, and, further, that his religious views represent the reaction of the mind against the mere worship of nature, tending, as this does directly, to polytheism and to the doctrine of emanations. It is, I think, equally evident that such views embody the highest struggle of the human intellect, unaided by revelation, towards spiritualism, i.e. a truly spiritual religion, and that they are, so far, an attempt to create a religious system by the simple energies of human reason. hence, their general direction is towards a pure monotheism. Ormazd et Araman, 194, Note 1. The Dasturs are the present priests of the Parsis. Essays on the Parsis, 296-7. Edited by Drive West. Ibid 146. 1878 History of Persia, 10. In the series of Ancient History from the Monuments. 4 further classical references to Zoroaster. Ere turning to purely Oriental ground, a few other classical allusions to Zoroaster may be mentioned. According to Plato, in Persia it was usual to commit the heir apparent to Toti of 4 chosen men, the first of whom instructed the cause him in the Magianism of Zoroaster, the son of Oromasis, which is the worship of the gods. Here the sage is described as the son of his divinity, the Parsi Ormazd, the Achaemenian Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian Ahura Mazda. Beresus makes Zoroaster a king of Babylon and the founder of a dynasty of 7 Chaldean monarchs, a complete error, whilst Justin, copying the Rishiatazant Sipruinstiero Ferd Case Tem Siahid Saint Rakdwayachariratnuf Toinsechi Iasnant Ni Wizgahirb I Uxenrigsr/XOF Some Tamite Neems Ashni S last war with Zoroaster, king of the Bactrians, who is said to have been the first that invented magic arts, and to have investigated with great attention the origin of the world and the motions of the stars. According to Justin, Ninus, who is a personification of the Akkadian Nin, Lord, or Lady/killed Zoroaster. With this tradition Arnobius is in exact accordance, and asserts that between the Assyrians and Bactrians, under the leadership of Ninus, and Zoroaster of old, a struggle was maintained not only by the sword and by physical power, but also by magicians by the mysterious learning of the Konalt Hiabnask Trioinside, and the Assyrian. Here Zoroaster is placed in his true abode, Bacti, Bactria, and the tradition is doubtless founded upon facts and refers to great prehistoric contests between Aryan, Tura Ngo Ormonius Astuntetride Ismhamanit Tiok. Frosisi and Erdme and Pomptio Stretroipot Susikvi Frey Ct Azerthniad, Iuatsndisnelmia Egresinadinst existed which described him as appearing to a multitude from a hill blazing with fire, that he might teach them new Sir MC Oyotenhai Aegs Orfnad Swozertsionid Pi.fd. Iest Hatem Sealfit Z Moiranatasat Fir Arlt Stn Das Rajanuasofo Basrarm Zna Supse Rat who, according to the story in Plato, JJ having been slain in battle, came to life again and related to his friends the destiny of the soul and its journey after death. The legendary Con Alcibiades, Iaput Jowet, the Dialogues of Plato, 2. 472 T. Caldecott, 2. Fragment, 9. History I1. So Moses of Chorene, I6. Arnobius, Adversus Gentes, I5. Ibid I52. T. Bryce, Arnobius Adversus Stromates I15. Gentes, 43, Note 2. Foot Ibid V14. It Republic, X amna ankutsionerik fel sulken usmet tsiris weist haziter oas lotiter itchi integri satianskt. Me authority upon famous doctrines, states that the magi or religion, or magia, known by the mystic name of Makhagistia, is the most uncorrupted form of worship in things divine, to the philosophy of which, in primitive ages, Zoroasters, a Bactrian, made many additions drawn from the mysteries of the Chaldeans. In later classical times many clumsy forgeries were attributed to Zoroaster, as to such personages as Orpheus, the Sanskrit Ibhu, and Hermes Trismegistos, Tet-thoth, i.e. thought or intellect, and there is still extant a work entitled Magicologia ton apotio u Zoroastro mag-on. The younger Cellus, AD 1020-1105, amongst his numerous writings composed scholia on Zoroastrian literature, and gives as a Zoroastrian saying the dictum that the soul, being a bright fire, by the power of the Father, remains immortal and is mistress of life. And, lastly, Ficinus, who died AD 1499, and who wrote a work entitled De Immortalitate Zoroaster, certain aquatic and anemi, Ariald satamtonst adarix komerdite seen by acute eyes, especially in Persia/it would be interesting to fully analyze and compare the above and other classical and medieval statements with Zoroaster and Magism as revealed to us by modern discovery. Suffice it, however, to observe here, that on the whole Zoroaster is described as an eminent Bactrian, possessed of mysterious wisdom in matters both physical and spiritual, engaged in contests with neighboring nations, the author of various occult works, versed in the law connected with demons and the destiny of the soul. Closely associated with the reverential or mystical use of fire, connected in the legend of with a resurrection or revival, and the son of Ahura Mazda. His magic or wisdom appears as a combination of both Bactrian and Chaldean lore, and its misratio kotnamesa jmik varagishit atunchi kremian das vozviant to 3 ko adriafain remagism. Asterisk Ammianus, XXIII, 6. FMX. TRVP Dvafiti Charpijov Fati Freib, Actk TFFGIF.VF.LJ Koyo /77 Fidel GOTIT Epudkori, Ancient Fragments, 255. Suidas calls Zoroaster an astronomer in the time of Ninos, who wished to be destroyed by fire from heaven, and warned the Assyrians to preserve his ashes. He mentions another Zoroasters, whom he styles a Perso-Median sage, who first established the Magian polity and lived 500 years before the Trojan War, perhaps the most reasonable date given by any 5. Iranian sacred literature. Such being the testimony of classical antiquity respecting Zoroaster the Magian, let us next consider him and his religion as they now stand revealed in the sacred books of Iran, translated, or I may rather say in many parts deciphered, by the genius and persevering efforts of Bernoulli, Spiegel, Hogg, and their several followers. The protagonist in this great work was the Frenchman Anquetil Duperron, whose name must never be forgotten in the history of Zoroastrian literature. Arriving at Bombay in 1754, he first revealed to Europeans the treasures of the Avesta. The greater part of the sacred writings of Iran has been lost, but judging by those of other countries, and from the testimony of historians, we may well believe that they were at one time of vast extent. Jafar Adavari, an Arabian Hisichu-Orgiakno Audisat statement of Abu Zoroaster's writings covered 1,200 cowhides, parchments, asterisk and hermapose estimated the verses of the sage at no less than 2,000,000.f according to the best tradition, which is supported by the sacred writings now in existence and by other references to many of the lost works. The entire canon once consisted of 21 books, called Nasks, the Visparad, and the Yasna. The word Nask is non-Aryan, and is connected by Hogg with the Assyrian Nusku. Now the Assyrian and Babylonian divinity Nabu, Nebo, the god of intellect, prophecy, and writing, is also known as a distinct Ainkuksakduya and budded vinuistic Uhursrian Thamra and Suiznkiofa Udastoari Gayan Galwai or the height of heaven. Hence these sacred books, the Nasks, purport to be named after the god of the height of Heaven, lord of intellect and writing. The Vendidad forms the classical writer. He assigns several works on nature, astrology, and other subjects to this Zoroaster. He also mentions a third personage, Ahura Mazda, whom he calls a Chaldean and a writer on mathematics and physics. In Mazdas we which, if we have apparently the accept the derivations for cum di zerpua rt of the name seed, would Ahura Mazda, give son of Mazda as the meaning of the name, which the statement of Plato that Zoroaster was would the thus exactly agree son of Oramasus with the teal herieratipius razain sages mrion titonitum suidas are of the Magi, doubtless the first of identical. Whom was Diogenes Zoroaster the Persian, to that of the fall of Troy. Hermodorus, the Platonic philosopher, calculates that 15,000 years elapsed. But Xanthos the Lydian BC 470 says that the passage of the Hellespont by Xerxes took place 6,000 years after the time of Zoroaster. Perry Bayan, Introduction, 2. Essays on the Parsis, 123. T. Hermapaski de tota ea arte diligentissime scripsit, et vicis centum millia versuum Zoroaster condita, indicibus quoque voluminum ejus positus explanavit. Pliny, History Nat XXX. 2. T. Vitae Lenormant, Etude, 325. 8/19 Nask. The Avestas end in Pahlavi, i.e. ancient Persian, Avest Kvathasna, Zornd, or textbook of and commentary / consists of 1. Sacrifice with prayers. 2. The Visparad, Vendidad, or all-head / a collection of, Vidavadata, or law against prayers. 3. The Deva / the Konvyaishnatus Veonotrata wen eritni violgia total fo enars.ge ashritis th eruchwyaxfntikrazumsa, esatunpstav, c4p, ormtafir keshdonraden point of priority and importance to the Rig Veda of the Indian OA, 2rr, Wyatsen Hosengasen adsten waheopfenxeodraviemungth.ism iatsat kron recisidics toitfun, rs 1t, Ayatunwe or 50th Venig Vidnich Tudish, Egatha dialect, and 3. The later Yasna, which is written in the ordinary language of the Avesta. Hogg traces the form and Avest K to Avesta, pp of vid, to know, with the meaning, what is known / or knowledge / corresponding nearly with Veda 1. The text of the Avesta, as we have it, probably belongs to the reign of Ardashir I, who in AD 226 put an end to the Parthian dynasty of Archaics, and became the founder of the Sassanids. This monarch made every effort to restore the national religion, which, although tolerated, had necessarily become much depressed beneath 5 centuries and a half of Greek and Parthian rule. The efforts of Ardashir were successful, the old sacred writings and traditions were collected, and although many of them have been subsequently lost, yet a most important residuum has been preserved to the present day by the Parsis, who left their country for India on the Mohammedan conquest of Persia AD 650. The great antiquity of amongst the writings collected other reasons. In his by time Ardashir is evident, the language of the Avesta had long ceased to be spoken, and the contemporaries of Ardashir could no more have composed a chapter of the Vendidad than an English gentleman of this century could imitate the Anglo-Saxon of King Alfred. As to date of composition, the Guptas and the earlier Yasna may be fairly / placed sometime prior to BC 1200, the greater portion of the Vendidad Sir BC 1000, the Visparad and later Yasna Sir BC 900 to 800, whilst the Yashts may be placed down to Sir BC 400. In addition to the foregoing archaic works, there is extant and extensive Pahlavi literature, using that term to denote the language of Persia during the Sasanian dynasty, AD 226 to 641. 2 Pahlavi works in particular may be Men *Vidi INF Sector 10. T. Essays, 121. J. Bleek, Avesta, Introduction, 11. 9 Tionid, the Dinkard and the Bundahayish or Cosmogony / the former consisted of 9 books, the first 2 of which are lost, and contains, amongst other things, the opinions of ancient Zoroastrians on traditions and customs and on various duties, the miracles of the Zoroastrian religion from the time of the first man to that of the last of the yet future prophets, details of the life of Zoroaster and an account of the contents of the Tmintoif Anta Hinaxkuz Sponrati Orf. Wadik hol Hisur Petrizatverdo Hired in the were, according to the Dinkard, but 2 complete copies of the sacred books. One of these then deposited in the royal archives at Persepolis was burnt there. The Bundahayish contains an account of the creation, of the opposition between the good and evil powers, of the nature of the various creatures, and of the future destiny of mankind, including the resurrection and the last judgment. The 2 latter remarkable features are, in Hogg's opinion, founded on original Avesta sources which are now lost. An ancient song is embodied in the account of the resurrection, the burden of which is that although it may appear to man to be impossible that the body when resolved into its elements and scattered to the winds should nevertheless be raised again, yet that to God all things are possible. So, too, the archaic Egyptians held firmly the doctrine of the resurrection of the body, a dogma in after ages to provoke the laughter of the Greek, mirth melancholy to the true philosopher, since it sprang from perhaps the most pronounced and at the same time the saddest feature in his character, an intense and passionate clinging to this perishing earth life. Achilles, the Greek ideal, has fitly been made the mouthpiece for that dark sentiment. Bather I'd choose laboriously to bear a weight of woes, and breathe the vital air, a slave to some poor hind that toils for bread, than reign the sceptred monarch of the dead. Far different from the gloomy Homeric abode of the departed was the paradise of song if that awaited the justified soul of the deceased Zoroastrian. Essays, 313. T. Vidi Bunsen, Egypt's Place, 4. 641, Lenormand, Chaldean Magic, 84. And authorities cited. Sint Heaven is the best life called Garadamna, as is well known, House of Hymns, and Paradise, Paradisa, i.e. A Hunkalvoashu Ursetae, place securely fenced in, is an Iranian word. Niversid 10:6. Mythology and religion. Such, then, are the Parsi scriptures, their composition extended over 800 or 900 years or more, and thus, like the Vedic hymns, they are the work of numerous individuals, and whilst possessing a kind of general unity of tone, on close examination are found to differ widely in style and religious standpoint as in language. The latest portion of the Avesta is replete with archaic ideas of a mythological character, a feature which applies equally to subsequent works, such as the Bundahayish, whilst in the Yasna, and especially in the Gudhas, the mythological element is but dimly visible, and the religious element is all-important. And here let me make a remark respecting the spheres of mythology and religion. The former corresponds with the material, the latter with the spiritual portion of the universe. They rise together as twin ideas in the human mind, and at the same time the mental and the physical eye grasp, however dimly, some of the wonders of God and the cosmos, of soul and body. Mythology did not spring from religion, nor religion from mythology. They were two sisters of one race, widely differing indeed in value, but at first equally simple, equally put for c.ms otno asterisk gervi monarchisolas triat philont, er promfi. Cecil fi tun totally in the legend no the particle by which was expressed the greatest revolution ever experienced in the development of the human mind, or rather by which the mind itself was brought into existence. It is the particle f as in the verse, and he the son is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, he rejoices as a hero to run his course. Nature appears to us as a man, as mind, but is not man or mind. This is the birth of mind. This f as is unknown not only to the Vedas, but even to the Greeks. F previously, it would seem, a most gross and crude mythology had reigned supreme, every one regarded the son as an actual bridegroom, a real hero, till one bright morning it occurred to the psalm writer, apropos of nothing in particular, that these expressions were merely similitudes. Surely a stupendous credulity must be required to enable anyone to accept such a theory, which is just as true and as false as the appended statement that this wondrous as is unknown to the Yedic poets. Take, for instance, a hymn to Ushas, the dawn. The hymn writer, after comparing Ushas to a dancer, and to a triumphant maid, continues asterisk appended to Dr. Golgiher's mythology among the Hebrews. T. Sector 13, 11 As a loving wife shows herself to her husband, so does Ushas, as it were, smiling, reveal her form. Asterisk here the symbolism and simile of the Yedic poet are as clear and pure as the psalmist's. Both are perfectly aware that sun and dawn are alike merely natural. There is no I wonder monopoly whether I ofmth mames it sat kirnio. Usp he's not o mensat in a tunda lastlze, I think we may safely reply that he is. Man, by the necessity of his being, applies anthropomorphisms to the phenomena of nature. From his standpoint the dawn smiles, the thunder shouts or laughs, the sun knoweth his going down, and the deep utters his voice and lifts up his hands on high. Here is no crude ignorance, no groveling concept, but a rich and splendid vein of natural poetry, sublime because and this is the real power of all potent thought and beautiful idea. It is practically, nay strictly, true. F7. Character and contents of the Gudhas. To revert to the Gathas, Their supreme age and importance in the inquiry is evidenced, 1. By the exceedingly archaic form of language in which they are composed, 2. By their being frequently quoted or referred to with the greatest respect in other sacred writings, e.g., they are expressly called the 5 Gūtas of the pure Zarathustra. 3. By their being the repositories of numerous ideas and forms of belief which have been subsequently elaborated, and 4. By the uniform tradition on the subject. The word is from the root gei to sing / and they are composed in a metrical form for recitation, each verse of the first containing 48, of the second 55, and of the third 44 syllables. Some of the meters naturally greatly resemble those of the Vedic hymns. In quoting from them I use the translation of Hogg, as that of Spiegel is admittedly inferior, and indeed in many passages absolutely unintelligible. The first Gutta bears the following heading, in the ordinary language of the Avesta, and therefore added long subsequent to the composition of all 5, the revealed thought, the revealed word, the revealed deed of the righteous Zarathustra. The archangels first sang the Gathas. Here it is implied that Zarathustra * Rig Veda, ICTXXIVH.OL7D, Tirnanchil Gathed Poetic DRD.UT Myuir, Sanskrit texts, v 185. Truest truth the fairest beauty. Mrs. Browning, The Dead Pen. Mazdayasna, IVI. 312 received these sacred songs through angelic agency, and hence that he was the human author of them and communicated them to the world. The triad of dhoti, word, and deed, often appears in the Avesta, and is used in a somewhat technical sense, as meaning the thoughts, words, and deeds enjoined by the Zoroastrian faith. Thus in a fragment of the Hadok Nask, which gives an account of the progress after death, we find 4 steps mentioned in the advance of the soul. The first step of the righteous he places upon good thought, the second upon good word, the third upon good deed, and the fourth and last upon the eternal lights. The account of the contrary progress of the unrighteous soul is lost, except the last clause, the soul of the wicked man forthly advanced with a step he placed on the eternal glooms, a calmly awful saying, which vies in solemnity with those of our own sacred books. The first Gutta forms chapters XXVIII. XXXIV of the Yasna and is to some extent a compilation of independent verses. In one place Zarathustra is spoken of in the third person, but as a rule he is the speaker throughout. In this Gutta are chiefly noticeable, I2. 3. The theory of agriculture as a sacred duty. The theory of the twin spirits. The protest against the Devas and their worship. In the second Gutta we have, in addition to various references to the foregoing subjects, 4. The view of Ahura Mazda as the creator. The last 3 Guttas which, on the whole, are not so important, also contain similar references, and a very material passage which explains Zarathustra's view of the theory of the twin spirits. These different subjects I shall notice in order. 8. Agriculture as a sacred duty. It is remarked of the state of things prior to the creation of human beings, Plotinus, that and in their manner was not indicative of a man to till certain income the ground, and the subduing of the earth is expressly assigned to the human race, not in the first instance as a toil to be accompanied by so in the sweat of the face, but as Greek religious mythology, Ahai and Demeter, Satridi Drukti. Mother, the earth considered in a state of orderly rule and cultivation, cosmic not chaotic, is the great patroness of Tritolamos and the other noble and nurturing heroes of civilization, who wander over the world, making all men acquainted 13 with the blessings and benefits of agriculture *, and here I may appropriately notice a link in name between the Aryans, Eastern and Western. Demeter, as lent to Geruder, Earth Mother is well known, is equivalent the Sanskrit dis, the equivalent of the Greek ge, signifies, 1. Cow, and 2. Earth, the earth being thus regarded in a secondary sense as the fostering cow of mankind, a kind of symbolism in exact harmony with the ideas of India, Iran, or Egypt, but which the intensely anthropomorphic spirit of the Greek would have rejected with disgust. So the Ribhus in the Rig Veda are said to soil have renovated or, and in this first cut the GDTHCTJTOWF genuism helior VDB Yorku LTCO Votlanog the cow, i.e. the spirit of the personified earth, is represented as complaining to heaven, and as being informed by Ahura Mazda through Zarathustra, that it was to be cut, that is, plowed, for the good of mankind. So Zarathustra, apparently addressing a large assemblage, and unfolding his doctrines to them, declares, I will now tell you who are assembled the wise sayings of Mazda, and the hymns of the good spirit. You shall hearken to the Jeshurva. That is, you shall duly cultivate the earth. And again we read of Armadi, the personification of prayer, and who was in Ahura Mazda, J. that when thou, Ahura Mazda, hast made her paths that she might go from the tiller of the soil to him who does not cultivate it. Of these two, i.e. the agriculturist and the nomad, she chose the pious cultivator, whom she blessed with the riches produced by the good mind. All that have no do not share itnal haragub de tidwarngsshi, p. the devas, namely, in the blessings of wealth, order, and civilization generally. The nomadic life necessarily degenerates, it * for a full analysis of the mythic position of Demeter and Persephone in connection with the Eleusinian mysteries, vide the Great Dionysic Myth, Vol. I 273, D. Sec. By the writer. Longmans & Co. 1877. T. Vide Ig Veda, 4. Hymns 33-37. T. In thee was Armadi, Yasna, XXXI. 9. Armadi is also considered as the angel of the earth, probably because prayers, although heaven-inspired, rise from earth. 14 becomes by contrast more and more rude and barbarous, and is sooner or later associated with lawlessness and rapine. There are numerous indications in the Avesta that the Zoroastrians suffered severely from time to time from the violence of wilder neighbors, and to promote the more settled and orderly life of agriculture thus became a sacred duty. It was in fact a form of the contest between chaos and cosmos. 9. The Zoroastrian theory of the twin spirits. Without here noticing the general view respecting Persian, Magian, or Zoroastrian dualism, I will at once quote the Gudhas, in illustration of the Zoroastrian concept of the twin spirits. In the beginning there was a pair of twins, two spirits, each of a peculiar activity, these are the good and the base, in thought, word, and deed. Choose one of these two spirits. Be good, not base. And these two spirits united created the first, i.e. the material world, one the reality, the other the non-reality. Of these two spirits you must choose one. You cannot belong to both of them. Did, then, the composer of this hymn believe in the actual objective existence from all eternity of two spirits, one the personification of good, the other the personification of evil? Certainly not, and why? Briefly, for the following reasons: I have Ahura Mazda himself is created all that is, and distinctly is spoken stated in the Gudhastu of as he who created by means of his wisdom the good and evil mind in thinking, words, and deeds. 2. These twins, called the two primeval spirits of the world, are styled the increaser and the destroyer. This explains the profound Zoroastrian concept: the twins are the end, two sides, as Hogg of the Divine Well observes, action, are like light and darkness, in Ahura Mazda. So, in another passage of the Yasna, Ahura Mazda declares, the more beneficent of my two spirits has produced the whole rightful creation. * 3. In later times, when Ormuzd, Ahura Mazda, and Ahriman, and Gromaniash, the dark or hurtful spirit, had, in the general belief of centuries, been pitted against each other for ages, the mind, still striving after a primitive unity, Yasna, 19. 915 derived them both alike from an imaginary personification designated Zarvanakarana, boundless time, a being unknown to the Avesta. 4. The dogma of the eternal existence of evil in the past is unknown to any other archaic religious belief, and therefore the most stringent proof of the existence of such a creed must be furnished ere the fact can be accepted. But no such proof can be supplied. V. On the other hand, the cause and origin of the later Iranian dualism is transparent. The dark spirit of Ahura Mazda, the mysterious side of providence, which shows itself objectively in the existence of darkness, evil, pain, injuring storms, and noxious creatures, soon naturally enough, and indeed, almost inevitably, received in belief a separate existence, and, as its operations were in apparent contradiction to those of the beneficent God, an imaginary strife arose between them, a contest whose physical counterpart had long before been known to mythology. 10 tg Protest against the Devas and their worship. Zarathustra, like many other great men who have been regarded as founders of religions, was essentially a reformer, and whilst undoubtedly claiming to be able to teach the way of God more perfectly was far from aspiring to the invention of a new and superior kind of faith. To compare small things with great, any particular religionist who makes a mighty effect upon his age resembles, however faintly, the founder of our faith, who at once accepted, illuminated, and fulfilled all past true religion, protested against the degeneracy of the then present religion, and threw a blaze of expanding and intensifying splendor upon the religion of the future. Even men like Muhammad and Sakyamuni were the outcome of terrible corruptions, against which they waged war and protested with immense effect, however great may have been the subsequent failure of their systems, and the creed of Zarathustra, having as its basis principle the grand truth of monotheism, has survived the vicissitudes of many a stormy age, and still proclaims with unshaken fidelity the doctrine of the archaic sage. I will next consider the protest of Zarathustra and the Deva cult. In the Gudhas we read, the passage in which Zarvanakarana is supposed to be mentioned, really reads, the beneficent spirit made them, in boundless time, v10 it dade paxerx. Is 9, ari.e. Naat usosmrikti moanyant piastsir, ayat.eir. One supreme deity is Ahura Mazda. Hogg, Essays, 53. 16 Ye devas have sprung out of the evil spirit who takes possession of you by intoxication. You have invented spells, which are applied by the most wicked. May the number of the worshippers of the liar, evil spirit, diminish. What, good ruler Mazda, are the devas? Those who attack the good existence, i.e. good men, useful animals, etc. By whose means the priest and prophet of the idols expose the earth to destruction. Whoever thinks the idols and all those men besides, who think of mischief only to be base, and distinguishes such people from those who think of the right, his friend or father is Ahura Mazda. This is the beneficent revelation of the supreme fire priest. Again, he says of the priests and prophets of idols, that, they ought to avoid the bridge of the gatherer, to remain forever in the dwelling place of destruction. And in the earlier yasna we find a formal confession of faith, I cease to be a deva, worshipper. I profess to be a Zarathustrian Mazdayasnian, devotee of Ahura Mazda, an enemy of the devas, and a devotee of Ahura, a praiser of the immortal benefactors, i.e. the Amishas Pentas. I forsake the devas, and those like devas. I praise the Ahurian religion, which is the best of all that are, and that will be. As it may be objected, in limine, that the Deva cult, which is admittedly polytheistic in character, was universal in Aryan regions until the age of Zarathustra, it may be replied, in limine, that Zarathustra no more invented the Ahurian creed than Saint Augustine, to take a prominent name, invented the Christian. And the evidence is similar in both cases, for just as the Bishop of Hippo speaks with approbation of the faith of many of his predecessors, and just as the name of Christ as a divine personage and as God, is to be met with centuries before his day, so, we find Zarathustra alluding to sayings of old revealed by Ahura * praising the ancient fire * Yasna. Sylvie 6. 17 Priests * and exhorting his adherents to revere the Angra 3 known in the Vedic Hynans as the Angaras, an ancient race or family peculiarly connected with religious rites even before the separation of Indian and Iranian, and so also we meet with the sacred name Ahura, as applied to the supreme Aryan divinity, even before the separation of the eastern and western branches of the mighty family. Thus the Ahurian religion, the faith of the Angaras, was already ancient in Zarathustra's day. Be it also observed that monotheism does not consist, as one might almost suppose from the manner in which it is frequently treated, in the negation of the belief in the existence of all sentient beings except God and ourselves. For, just as we, who are monotheists, accept the existence of angelic intelligences, good and evil, and of the souls of the dead, holy and unholy, so Zarathustra may have regarded the devas as actual objective existences, as evil angels or demons, without thereby in any degree infringing on his position as the champion of monotheism. I am not inquiring what his views on the subject were, but merely wish to show that in any case they do not affect the general question, inasmuch as he certainly did not regard the devas as true gods. 11. History of the name Ahura, meaning of Ahura Mazda. It is one of the greatest triumphs of modern scientific research to have revealed, by means of historical and philological investigation, the primitive unity of the Aryan family, a grand fact, which, like all other facts, is in perfect harmony with the biblical statement. Now know that there was a time when the ancestors of Celt, Teuton, Slav, Latin, Greek, Iranian, and Indian, dwelt together as a single nation. Then came a first and great separation, when Iranian and Indian were left to Orgio Tussurale Wohoifalesti, the others, impelled by the old westward Ho, pushed forward and Myson to Arab *vidi infcs. 30-32 T. Arab signifies the west/and, similarly, the Arabs are the people in the west of Asia. Arabos is originally the western gloon after sunset, from the Assyrian Arabu, to descend, as the sun. In accordance with this circumstance, the Homeric Arabos lies in the west. The cave of Skyle looks towards the west, i.e. to Arabos, OD 1281, Odysseus turns towards Arabos to sacrifice, Ibid x 528, and thence the ghosts assemble, Ibid 1137. Hades, as king of the underworld, is called Hesperos Theos, Sophocles, OED. Tyr. 177, and a westward position was generally adopted by the Greeks when invoking infernal divinities, cf. Mitford, History of Greece, XXII 2. The main entrance to Greek temples of god c18 now Europe. After a time came a second separation, when the ancestors of the Aryan Indians wandered southeastwards into the Punjab, the region of the 5 or 7 streams *. Now the name Ahura, in the form Ahura, is one of the most familiar, and at the same time perhaps the most interesting title in the sacred literature of ancient India. In late times the Ahuras are represented as demons or fiends confined in hell, and powerless against the gods. F. In the Puranas, their opponents are styled, by a false etymology, Suras, and they are supposed to be Asuras, not Suras. In the Vedic literature of the second class, the Bordmanas, the Ahuras are the cunning and powerful opponents of the Devas or gods. Going back still further, to the Vedic literature of the first class, we find the Ahuras described in the Atharvaveda, the last and latest of the 4 Vedas, as evil and tricky beings, who are put down and whose devices are frustrated by the rishis or Vedic seer poets. Lastly, we come in an ascending scale to the Rig Veda, in the 10th and latest book of which the Ahuras are still unfavorably described as the opponents of the gods and the good. But in the earlier portions of the Rig there are, according to Hogg, only 2 passages where the word is used in an unfavorable sense. Thus during the latter part of the long period occupied in the gradual composition of the Rig Veda, the depreciation and degradation of the term Ahura and Ahuras went on steadily, until this principle culminated in their position in the late mythology. I will give some instances of the use of the word in a good sense, in the earlier portion of the Rig, and I may here remark that the translation by Wilson, which is based upon the views of that Indian Mazdayasna, AD 1350, most was generally on bright beings, the eastern side, who love the east, for as Zeus and connected his fellows with the are the Devas or dawn, the light, and the day. But the shrines of heroes faced westward, to show that they had once been mortal and had sunk like the Vedic Yarna, was the first of men the sun in that died, death, for the sun god, the first who found the way, the Rig Veda, x 14. Happy West in the 1, 2, to the heavenly world archaic Egyptian religion. Vidi INF Sector 24. Of the West being thus connected with the infernal divinities, some Christian writers regarded it as the special region of the devil and evil spirits. The word Erebus has also been identified with the Sanskrit ragas, but this is not approved by the best Uthe Pertite Yezai, enviated Professor M. Miller, Rig Veda Sanlayata, I-42. Is the Saptasindhavas of the Vedas, a name of the Indus country or India? Hogg, Essays, 230, Note 3, T. Southey's Curse of Kahama fairly illustrates this stage. It Vidi Atharvaveda, 4. XXIII 5, 7. 7-2. Rig Veda, 2. XXXII 4, 7. Sa 5. An opponent of Indra, is styled in Ahura, in the later passage Varchin, 19 famous of native commentators on the Veda, is by no means to be relied on in the matter *. Thus we read F. This soma is to be distributed as an offering among the Ahuras. The soma is, Hog. To be offered by us for the divine beings, Mur. Here the Ahuras are simply the gods. And the title Ahura is also applied to some of the principal divinities separately, to Ayudra, Agni Savitri, to the divine dyad Varuna and Mitra, but especially to Varuna, the archaic head and chief of Vedic divinities, and whom we meet with in the West as Auranos, so that he was known to the undivided Aryan family. Thus investigation discloses that the name Ahura, in the form Ahura, was originally used in a good sense, alike in India and in Iran, and in both countries was especially applied to the supreme divinity. This name and concept were, therefore, the common property of the Eastern Aryans ere their separation into Iranian and Indian. But the term can be carried still further back, for we find it in the Asir the general name for the gods of the Teutons and Scandinavians, and in the Urs and Etruscan/Ezer, and hence it was the common property of the united Aryan race, their ancient and venerable appellation of the supreme. Next, what asu y breath/the spiritual, ani sdl ifatem/oram swagrnian and rigsa, llythceo eltna hevisatundijid v in wtia teh the Yedic living God, as opposed to the human. The god of Zarathustra Ahura Mazda, Sayana represents the Sanhita, Preface, 15, and not to be understood, Ibid T. Rigveda, Ikien. 6. Tradition of India, Professor Miller, Rigveda in many cases teaches us how the Veda ought 9. Samo Asurar. The soma juice, supposed to have been obtained from the plant Asclepias, Vidi Wilson, Rigveda Sanhita, I6, Canon Collinson, Ancient Monarchies, 2-329. Rigveda, I live. 3 Ibid 4. 2-5. Asterisk Ibid 7. XXXVI 2, 8. XXV 4. If Ibid IXXXV. 7 foot Ibid. I renders Ahura XXIV. 14 Averter of Here Wilson, under misfortune, adding the it influence of is an unusual sayana, sense of the word, but it would scarcely be decorous. To call Varuna an Ahura, Vidi also Mur, Sanskrit texts, v. 61, M. Darmstetter remarks, Varuna estle clio le plus frequement design su le nom de Ahura, Ormas dt Aranian, 47. JL The original form of the word is Ansu, Vidi Tile, Outlines of the History of the Ancient Religions, 190, Darmstetter, Ormas dt Araman, 47, Note 4. According to Suetonius, Esar was an Etruscan word which meant God. Asar also researches, 144. Means God in Isar means * God's Urs, Revelation or Spirits. Isaac Taylor, Ibid, 293. Etruscan C220L, the Ahura who is called Mazdao, is, the wise living spirit / or perhaps rather, the living creator. * 12. The Devas and the Deva cult. Such being the god of the Ahurian religion / let us next consider the Devas and their cult. The important root Dayu, meaning primarily to spring / and hence to shine forth / has become the parent of a whole tribe of famous words, e.g., Dios, a Vedic name for the god of the gleaming heaven, the father, called Dios Pitar, the Greek Zeus Pater, and Latin Jupiter and Janus Pater. Juno, Dianus, Diana, are other connected names, as is the German Tiu, which survives in Tuesday. Diu has also supplied the general name for god or gods, Deva, Theos, Deus, Divus, i.e. the bright, so, conversely, the Yedic Deva is atheos, or godless. The Devas are, therefore, the bright ones / the divinities of the morning, the dawn, the day, the lighted and gleaming firmament. So we find the dictum, the evening is not for the gods, it is unacceptable to them. Deva, therefore, like Ahura, was originally a good epithet amongst the Aryans, and has continued to be so in India, Greece, and Italy. But just as the Hindu Aryan degraded the latter term, so the Iranian Aryan degraded the former, and in the Guptas and throughout the Avesta it is applied to false gods and hostile demons, and at length appears in the Enlotmi epi Bresniadnad Fayadresmzan yf% Izamiasnan Nog deceit fiend tho or evil spirit. The law against the Devas, and from the is preeminently the Zarathustrian standpoint Aryan India country of the wicked Deva worshipping men. Now, whatever the Aryan religion in India may have been originally, it undoubtedly at a certain period was, or became, polytheistic, and it will be observed that *Mazda the Vedic myths, wise, or when applied to priests, one skillful, able to make everything, Hogg, Essays, 301. Professor Miller and Benfei agree in this connection. Vidi Muir, Sanskrit Texts, v. 120, note. M. Darnesteter Master, Forma prefers to derive Ahura an Indo-Iranian asu, with from in which he Iranian word, ahu, compares the Greek wq, Ahura Mazda would thus signify the very wise Lord. The Kev. K. M. Banerjee takes a bolder flight, and confidently connects Ahura with Azure, remarking the name Ahura Mazda was derived from Azure / the Assyrian term for God or Lord, the Aryan Witness. Preface, 11. Calcutta, 1875. Afrik Veda, v. Ihsi. $2 Professor Miller has elaborately traced the forms of the root diu, such as div, dev, div, etc., Lectures on the Science of Language, 2. 493, Vendidad, 19. 29-21 Zarathustra does not proclaim the cult of the Ahuras as against that of the Devas, but the worship of the Ahura, Ahura Mazda, as against that of the company of Devas, God against gods, monotheism against polytheism. Now Zarathustra, as noticed, was a reformer, refers to good men living ere his time, and did not invent the concept of Ahura, and therefore, so far as the investigation has proceeded, we have exceedingly strong reasons for surmising that the Vedic period was one of gradual degradation, during which, what Vavdurulms idehofsby etun hathpersiag feeder / iort haithgudr knowledge of India of heaven, was by degrees transformed into the Devas or band of bright divinity ies, in disregard of that profound there is but one sky, how can saying thereof be a Chinese sage, many gods? Air considering the Vedic religion in this connection, several points alluded to in the foregoing quotations from the Tasna must first be noticed. 13 The Soma orgies and the bridge of the judge. By the intoxication Soma juice, spoken of in the Karapayes or Gsitha is that performers produced of sacrificial rites, were accustomed in the days of feud between Indian and Iranian to prepare solemn Soma feasts for the Indian divinities. The Kavas or seer priests of the Yedic Aryans then invoked a particular divinity with hymns, and the god was supposed to descend and partake of the delicious beverage. His votaries next intoxicated themselves more or less, and when sufficiently excited set out on plundering excursions. Hence the horror and abomination with which the Zarathustrians regarded these depraving orgies, which at once vastly debased the concept of divinity and ruined the P.E.Chi Perliesitsndorf orderly idols, agriculturist. An expression the Gutta speaks which seems clearly of to imply an image worship more or less pronounced. Professor Miller states that the religion of the Veda knows of no idols. The worship of idols in India is a secondary formation, a later degradation of the more primitive worship of ideal gods. T. Bollinson and others are of a contrary opinion. The truth probably is, that images began to appear towards the end of the Vedic period. The bridge of these idol priests are worn to gatherer, the celebrated Chinvat pool. The phrase may also be rendered bridge of the judge, which seems to me to be rather the preferable *apud Professor Miller, Introduction to the Science of Religion, 195 tons chips, I-38. Niversid 22 reading. This bridge leads across the aerial abyss to heaven, and all souls must essay to traverse it, but the righteous alone can succeed whilst the wicked fall from it into hell beneath. It bridge al-Sirat, laid is the origin of the Mohammedan over the midst of hell, finer than a hair, and sharper than the edge of a sword slash whence the wicked will fall into the abyss. The root of the idea seems simply to be that heaven being regarded as above and hell beneath, the soul at death rises, in the desire to reach the former. But how shall it cross the vast abyss save by some aid, which may fitly be figured as a bridge? The wicked necessarily fail, as they may not enter heaven. The account of the soul's progress after death is highly interesting. The righteous man is assisted across the bridge by a beautiful maiden, who is a personification of that holiness which he has chosen when in life, an unique and remarkably fine idea, said Ahura Mazda. After a man is dead at daybreak after the third night he reaches Mithra, apparently the solar region. The soul goes on the time-worn paths, which are for the wicked and which are for the righteous, to the Chinvad bridge created by Mazda. Here it is met by the maiden referred to. She, the beautiful, well-formed, strong, comes. She dismisses the sinful soul of the wicked into the glooms. She meets the souls of the righteous when crossing the celestial mountain, and guides them over the bridge of the judge into the heavenly regions, where they are joyfully welcomed. Vohumano, the good mind rises from a golden throne. Vohumano exclaims, "How hast thou come hither to us, righteous one? From the perishable life to the imperishable life?" The souls of the righteous proceed joyfully to Ahura Mazda, to the Amishas spent as, to the golden throne, to paradise. Fat Didad, 19. 23. The corresponding account in a fragment of the Hadith Nasjc states, on the passing away of the third night after death, as the dawn appears, the soul of the righteous man appears, passing through plants and perfumes. To him there seems a wind, more sweet-scented than other wines, advancing with this wind there appears to him what is his own religion, in the shape of a beautiful maiden. Then the soul of the righteous man spoke to her, "One, what maiden art thou, most beautiful of maidens?" Then answered him his own religion, "I am Deity/Outh, thy good thoughts, good words, good." And then the righteous soul fecht consummation of bliss, the advances the last being 4 steps to placed upon their eternal luminaries. 14. The Amishaspentas. The end Parsis, soul of to the whose the righteous is said to proceed to Ahura Mazda Naim Niesh Sizen Pipniti Saz, Immo Tamilsbian Sepfake Desires of the and of whom, as we have seen the devout Ahurian is a praiser. These personages may be quotation from Plutarch, it Hilarinot Mrazdust Abhi Urav Mirzidin Teriasvshing sprung from the purest light, but Areamanios and Gramaniash from the darkness, Krov Ou, they made war on each other, and the one Horomazes made 6 gods, the first, He god, of good mind, Tuvotak. Good mind / afterwards known this as the Isyahumano, angel Bahman, a personification of the nature of Ahura Mazda, and who, as noticed, welcomes the righteous soul on its entry into heaven. And the second, the God, of truth, Ozijflfek. This is Ashavahista, the most beautiful truth. Esliya, the equivalent of the Vedic Rita, is the universal order of things, both material as in the cosmos, and religious, as in fitting worship and ritual. Thus the term signifies order, righteousness, truth. Ashavahista is a kind of personification of light, which is truth revealing and displays the harmony of the all, in opposition to darkness, which is essentially ignorant and chaotic. Asterisk Vidi Sector 7. T sup. Sector 10. T sup. Sector 13, 24, and this is the third, the god Kshatravarya, of good government, the independent sway. The Kshatriya, or warrior caste, is the second of the four ancient H-spine Da'ant Darsmo Tafistid Whe Krthasit Piornafarikate Wazatchiarul, Giatad/S, Topfiit Wiri. Ashtmo Aman. And 1 SD. This is another, the god, of wealth, W. Kavrov. This is Orvatad, health/who was afterwards supposed to preside over the fruits of the Earatundi which spring the remaining up from the dwelling of Plutus Pluto. 1. The maker of the pleasures in what is beautiful. Asterisk This somewhat curious definition we can but apply to the remaining Amashaspenta Amirtad, immortality/in which the righteous shall enjoy the endless loveliness of God. Now these six personifications, the good mind, truth, power, piety, health, and immortality, who, together with Ahura Mazda, make up the mystic number of 7 spirits of holiness and purity, afford a striking instance of the intense monotheism of the system of Zarathustra, for they are not distinct divinities in origin, but, as their names show, merely phases of the beneficent action and perfect character of Chhyukshuasprike Meme Ma'inal 8 are times of the evil corresponding list mind/Tarik. Of demons, darkness/Enzaric, poison, were excogitated in order to supply Angramaniash with assistant counselors, and to make a complete system exactly corresponding in its halves, on the principle grove nods at grove, each alley has its brother, and half the platform just reflects the other. This formal and arbitrary arrangement of divinities and supernatural personages, good, bad, and indifferent, is what may be termed pantheonization, is purely or mainly artificial, and always marks a late phase in the religious thought of a community. In Greece the Homeric poems paved the way for the system of Hesiod, from which the class of thinkers who culminated in Socrates and Plato ever recoiled, and which was essentially self-destructive. There is great truth, mixed doubtless Homer with and some alloy of Hesiod were error, in the first, the to remark of compose Herodotus, Theogonies, and give the gods their epithets, to allot them their several offices and occupations, and describe their forms but, at the same time, it must be observed that the concept of a supreme power associated with 6 other personages, the whole body forming a mystic 7, is a really archaic idea. Perry Island. JKOS. Slay If Herod, 2. 5325 and 1, which was not unfamiliar to the undivided Indo-Iranians. Araeomanios, says Plutarch, sprang from the darkness, Zaphos, i.e. the west, as Zephyros is the western wind. Hence he is identical in concept with Erebus, the gloom after sunset. 15. Mithra. With the exception of Ahura Mazda himself, no name is more famous Mithra, the Iranian friend/the religious mythology, than that of Vedic Mitra, the divinity of beaming light, and hence the sun god, not by any means the solar photosphere crudely regarded as a sentient being. In the Mir Yakjit, or invocation to Mithra, Ahura Mazda declares, when I created Mithra, I created him as worthy of honor, as praiseworthy, as I myself. Ahura Mazda/of Mithra. M. Lenormand remarks clearly explained in what remains of Trithitzario Sastro Arrange of Noisks no T, but that he, seems ben consulstantial Shiovidavism. R. Unfaromaserum Tuzd, and to judge have after death. His name, title, and high position in the Mazdayasna faith unquestionably belong to the most ancient phase of this religion. Elsewhere, he alludes to a much puzzled the commentators/the Teep Wayostag Vain Whitakers. As I understand Spiegel to interpret this of the sun and the Pafel Tenratajenud Pietzers Bulat. The sun, I suppose rather that the 2 is mentioned almost immediately of Ahura Mazda divine friends and Mithra/I or Ahura Mazda and Mithra themselves. Now Mithra is almost the only divine personage besides Ahura Mazda to whom, in the more archaic portion of the Avesta, a distinct, objective, actual, sentient existence is undoubtedly attributed. Thus we read Mithra, who bestows, good dwelling on the Aryan regions, may he come to us for protection, for joy, for mercy, for healing, for victory, For hallowing, Mithra will I honor with offerings, will I draw near to as a friend with prayer. Give us the favors we pray thee for, O hero, kingdom, strength, victoriousness, sanctification, and purity of soul. *Vide p. 17, note F. Chaldean Magic, 236. F. Ancient, History of the East, 2. 33 Yasna, I 29. 26 Greatness and Knowledge of Holiness, Instruction in the Holy Word / the physical and mythological side of his character, which is also of great interest, I need not refer to in this connection, but it will be observed that Mithra cannot, like the Amish's Pentas, be resolved into a mere personification of a quality or a virtue or the like, and hence in the Zoroastrian system he is not included amongst them. They are but illustrations of the character of Ahura Mazda, the supreme, Mithra, though ever working in perfect harmony with him, though so closely connected with him that M. Lenormant makes use of the remarkable expression consubstantial, is nevertheless also a distinct divinity, as worthy of honor as Ahura Mazda himself. Mithra is not only the support, friend, and protector of the righteous, but also the constant and triumphant opposer of the devas and of the wicked man. And, like the august concept of the sun god elsewhere, he is preeminently the judge. So in Egypt the sun god, of Menjay whilst, as R. A. Fox and as Talbot Uasar, Osiris, has observed, is the judge. Great name of the sun in Assyrian theology was Dayan Nisai or Dian Nisajef Amen, T. Hatha Udadidian Famni N, Itun Hejig Pairt Eknodrio Anius Os. J. Neither the High One / in Assyria and Akkad, nor Ahura, the Living One, in Iran, take upon themselves the function of judge of mortals, they delegate the great work to their august representative and manifestation the sun god. It is impossible not to recall in this connection various statements in our own sacred books in perfect harmony with this belief. Thus we are told that the Father hath committed all judgment unto the Son, who was ordained of God to be the judge of quick and dead, God having appointed a day, in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained. And this the sun and shield. Judge is the with the later son of righteousness / Mithra, who as Mithras in conjunction with Serapis so triumphantly invaded the Roman Empire and drove the classic gods of Greece and Italy from *Miryasht. T. From the Assyrian Danu, judge, Hebrew Dan general slicks. 16, cf. Dan shall judge his people, and Nisug, man. J. Vide the Great Dionysic Myth, 2. 209 for a consideration of the concept and position, physical and spiritual, of the sun god, vide the archaic solar cult of Egypt. By the writer. Theological Review, October, 1878 January, 1879. St. John v. 22. It Acts x 42. Ibid 17. 31 foot Malachi 4. 2 J. Samyathsiv. 1127 The field degrading even Jupiter himself to the rank of a mere planetary genius, I am not concerned. His mysteries, trials, tests, tortures, grades, and their contest and connection with Christianity and Gnosticism, form an exceedingly interesting study, but neither truly Zarathustrian, nor yet archaic. 1 Eubolos, quoted by Porphyry, wrote a history of Mithra in many books, and connected Zoroaster with his cult *16. Mithra and the Gudhas. In the Mithra of the Avesta the sun god is presented before us in his customary double aspect. Physically, he sees all things, possesses wide pastures, has a chariot and swift horses, or stands clad in gold upon the mountain tops. But he is far more than this, he is also a mighty spiritual being, the judge, the terrible opponent of evil men and evil powers, the avenger of the broken contract and the scourge of the liar, the bestower of reward, fame, and holiness to the soul, to whom a man may draw near in prayer as to a friend. Now, as the name Mithra of contract does or noptrum sixur /enthingst kos setsikon fetoirn tonesistinrecition is, what is the connection between Mithra and the religion of follows, the Gudhas? Whilst in the general opinion the Gathas we never is somewhat as find mentioned gods like Mithra and Anahita we meet with their names in nearly every page of the later Yasna. Here arises the question why the author of the Gathas disregarded these gods and divine beings whom it was afterwards held sinful to neglect. Tuthio Sutgonold Beist, H. R. Evamasansau e beam riadasan rita hias fsian de chain leoid palriader siop phenel rietal hive geodoina. Rn Lietersamoronderos are trian scriptures, and his appearance with the other angels, in the later writings, denotes a partial lapse into idolatry. Although I dissent with diffidence from such authorities, yet I am compelled to do so in the present instance, and for the following reasons. Mithra occupied a position of exceedingly high honor and importance prior to the separation of Indian and Iranian. Vidi C.W. King, The Gnostics and Their Remains, 97, Porphyry, Periapachas Tun Empsachan, 4. 16, Peritouno Dusia Tun Nui Fin Antro, 2. At promise or contract is called Mithra, and to break it is to lie to Mithra, Mazdayasna, Sylvie. 5. Vendidad, 4. Plus the classical Anaitis and the Chaldeo-Assyrian Anatu. Her case is not analogous with that of Mithra, as she sprang from an entirely different source. Mithra is a purely Aryan divinity. Hogg, Essays, 260. The Academy, June 29, 1878, p. 583. 28 That position he never lost, either in the Avesta, or in the earlier portions of the Rig Veda, whilst various other divinities were degraded either by Indian or Iranian. 2 The authors of the Gdtijas were perfectly acquainted with the worship of Mithra, but it is never condemned by them, and as, moreover, many Gudhas are undoubtedly lost, it is quite possible that Mithra may have been mentioned with approval in these. The argumentum e taciturnitate is proved in countless instances to be one of the weakest that can be employed. 3 There are apparently several indirect references to Mithra in the extant Gudhas. Thus, as noticed, his name occurs in the sense of contract, and, as mentioned, reference is made to the bridge of the gatherer or judge/dini Othmit, Haran D. as M. Lenormant notices, was the judge after the customary mythologico-religious function of the sun god is to be the judge, guide, and conductor of souls, as the one who first passed into the unseen world. I think, therefore, that Mithra is the personage here alluded to. In the later portion of the Avesta Mithra reappears in a position not regarded of as the highest honor, a circumstance lapse into idolatry / because I which do not I do think that his concept was originally idolatrous. This circumstance points rather to his having been regarded with unbroken respect. Lastly, the authors of the Gudhas, who were making a great monotheistic protest, had an obvious reason for suppressing the name, lest the nomen should, as in countless other instances, and as was subsequently actually the case here, become the Nutnan. As M. Lenormant observes, there is doubtless a certain obscurity connected with the Mithraic concept as it appears in the Avesta, but I think with him, that we may without hesitation link Mithra with the most ancient phase of the Iranian religion, and, further, that a careful analysis of the archaic concept of Mithra, and especially bearing in mind his intimate relation with Ahura Mazda, will make us hesitate ere *vidi the Ca and Rig Veda, books of the Vedic Yania, and the hymns on the 9. The Greek idea was similar. Subject in the Stesichoros, BC 632 to 552, sings how Helios Hyperion's son, went down into his golden cup and sailed away o'er ocean to the deep realms of night, to visit his beloved ones in the sacred laurel grove. The great Dionysia J.C. myth, I 317, TCF Exodus XXIII. 13, In all things that I have said unto you be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth. 29 We pronounce the respect or reverence originally paid him to have been idolatrous. As the Homeric poems contain numerous personifications of ideas, such as rumor, terror, panic, discord, sleep, death, and the like, so, in the Avesta, we find disease, decay, poverty, deceit, dwarfishness, sloth, darkness, poison, represented or spoken of as personal demons, and other concepts more august such as Sriyasha, the personification of the divine service, Rashnu, the personification of justice, Asha, order, physical, moral, and religious, and the Amishaspentas equally resolve themselves, so far as actual objective existence is concerned, into thin air. But Mithra, the most mightiest, brilliant of strongest, most theozitas, * famous, most, or beings victorious, worthy of honor / cannot be so resolved. He is neither the sun, nor the light, but the spirit of brightness and the sentient friend of man. 17 Ahura Mazda as the creator. It remains to notice the statement in the Guptas respecting Ahura Mazda as the creator of all things. I have already quoted a passage which declares that the material world was created by his two spirits, and in another place we read, Armadi came with wealth, the good and true mind, she the everlasting one, created the material world. Now Armadi, the Yedic Aramadi, is prayer, or divine wish, and, as noticed, the is personification of in Ahura Mazda, and hence the meaning is that divine yearning tender and benevolent occasioned creation. So, again, we read, that I shall ask thee, tell it me right, O Ahura. Who was in the beginning the Father and Creator of righteousness? Who created the path of the sun and stars? Who causes the moon to increase and wane but thou? Who is holding the earth and the skies above it? Who made the waters and the trees of the field? Who created the lights of good effect and the darkness? Who created the sleep of good effect and the activity? Who created morning, noon, and night? Who has prepared the Bactrian home? To become acquainted with these things, I approach thee, Mazda, beneficent spirit, creator of all beings. O that I shall ask thee, tell it me right, Ahura. The Vedic Yajata and the Parsi Izad or you angel T sector 9. 80 How may I come, Mazda? To your dwelling place, i.e. heaven, to hear you sing? The touching simplicity of the last question may almost provoke a smile, but let any Lucretius who, either in despairing incredulity or in temporary satisfaction with the water of this life, has dropped his plummet down the broad deep universe and said see no God, finding no bottom / commune for a moment with his own heart respecting this sacred thirst divinity, this and appear bgerfifurum fiang gunftwars, I ent infantoi orn reciatali I edwi haeti nearsfnrila selfit and egrasiatum hoev God *. Is it baseless, a mere desire for nothing? I would as soon believe that physical thirst was unaccompanied by an answering actuality. No sadder doom can befall a mortal than to convince himself that this, the noblest aspiration of the soul, is altogether fallacious. To such an one it may almost be said in those the fruits that thy soul words lusted of unapproachable sadness, after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. That I do not exaggerate, witness the confession of the candid and most unhappy Physicus, at the conclusion of his able work, see I am not ashamed to confess that with this virtual negation of God the universe to me has lost its soul of loveliness, and when at times I think of the appalling contrast between the hallowed glory of that creed which once was mine, and the lonely mystery of existence as now I find it, at such times I shall ever feel it impossible to avoid the sharpest pang of which my nature is ancient Iran we see no suoskept timbaland umfantalam neklanika volni that in gloom / but rather a childlike confidence and simple faith that Ahura will guide through all darkness and difficulty, and that at the closetal drill sugal in see some almost his face. Unimagined fashion, his Ahura who is giving all, good things, cannot be deceived. All that have been living, and will be living, subsist by means of his bounty only, the soul of the righteous attains to immortality. A** tid teg fit btmv / ariova of opt jtrod. Od 3. 48, T. Candid Examination of Theism, 114, English and Foreign Philosophical Library, Vol. 9. 31 Him I wish to adore with my good mind, him who gives us fortune and misfortune according to his will, he knows with his true and good mind, and gives to this world freedom from defects and immortality, for he only hath immortality. It will be remembered that I am not speaking so much of Iranian religion generally, nor even of the religion of the Avesta, a work of many hands and many years, but of the religion of Zoroaster, and I think it must, upon the whole, be admitted that amongst the various phases of uninspired faith, his will stand almost second to none, and that it is distinctly and essentially monotheistic. Having now considered it in itself, I will next briefly view it in connection with archaic, i.e. pre-Zarathustrian, monotheism, and with this feature chiefly as it appears amongst the Eastern members of the Aryan family. Part 2. The early Vedic belief. 18 various modern theories respecting the nature of Vedic belief. As the earliest Vedic literature is admittedly nearer in language, style, and tone of thought to the period of Indo-Iranian unity than Gat-Jt as, it is to the Arvigstav Din Erdalili, or perhaps even than the Yeda of Praise, which stands at the head of the Aryan sacred literature of India, that we must, in the first instance, turn for information respecting pre-Zarathustrian faith. The Sanhita or collection of the Rik, consists of 1017 sujektas or hymns containing 10,580 riklias or verses and is divided into 10 books called mandalas or circles. The work appears to be the production of some 150 writers, and its composition doubtless extended over several centuries. From the nature of the human mind and from the experience we possess of other archaic sacred works, we may expect to discern in it a great uniformity of tone and a general method of treatment, combined with almost infinite variety in detail, often apparently highly conflicting, and a gradual drifting of the mind towards fresh mental standpoints, a phase which shows itself in a fluctuation in the amount of respect paid to various divinities, who thus from time to time fall or rise in the estimation of their votaries. All this we shall find abundantly in the Rik. There is, of course, no question that the faith of the Aryan Indian became practically polytheistic, although many theistic or even monotheistic features were 32 retained or added, whilst pantheism, ever a late form of philosophico-religious thought, likewise appeared in its turn in a most pronounced and developed phase. But the question before us is not what archaic Indian faith had become at the end, but what it was, to go back at present no further, at the commencement, of the Vedic period. And here at the threshold of the investigation, the inquirer must not be discouraged by finding the widest difference of opinion amongst experts. The student, therefore, whilst giving all honor where it is due, will carefully retain the right of private judgment, nor consent to follow blindly the chariot of any particularly great literary conqueror. There is no absolute and inherent necessity that the best philologist should be also the best mythologist, or that the man who possesses the greatest acquaintance with the body of a work should have most truly caught its real spirit. There is, indeed, a decided a priori probability in his favor, but nothing more. Dunable preference for his great Professor Miller, with study, observes, the Apar-Veda, I feel convinced, will occupy scholars for centuries to come, and will take and maintain forever its position as the most ancient of books in the library of mankind. I think the Veda scarcely possesses this preeminent claim to antiquity, but sure whether scholars will be I am that for centuries to huxamo up, as to height or not, present state of things endure so long, men will investigate with undiminished interest the archaic beginnings of religion, in connection with the supreme question of its truth, and of the reason of its existence amongst mankind. The fact that highly able inquirers have regarded the Vedic religion as polydaimonic or even lower, as polytheistic, as henotheistic, or as monotheistic, is at first sight very startling, but even a slight study of the Veda almost clears up the mystery, inasmuch as it soon reveals the principles on which the various experts acted. Thus, according to the Vedic Indian observing, like other savage or semi-savage tribes, a vast amount of extra-human power around, worshipped it everywhere and in anything or in everything. The principle of anthropomorphism obtained more or less, as of course, and thus the cult was polydaimonic or fetishistic. According to B., the Vedic Indian, like other Aryans, was deeply impressed by the most remarkable phenomena of nature, which he personified and adored, hence he was a polytheist. According to C., the Vedic Indian had a wonderful sense of the greatness and goodness of the divine, but he was unable to consider the whole except in its parts, and hence when he Rig Veda Sanhita, I preface, X33 hymned this or that phase of superhuman potency, it assumed supreme dimensions in his mind, and being, of course, personified, the worshipper thus became a henotheist, or one who adores many gods, any one of whom may be regarded in turn as the highest. According to D., the Vedic Indian originally believed in one God, whose phases of character and material manifestations by degrees became personified, whereby the original, simple, and sublime idea was shrouded and hence forgotten. And are there then passages in the Rig Veda which countenance, or seem to countenance, each of these contradictory opinions? Most certainly, and hence the theories, but here, as elsewhere, led by what I may as far call the as possible tyranny of Ias Volyad Tibdidensk. Lides written again / must be our constant motto, for the 91st Psalm is by no means the only scripture that may be perverted through this most objectionable principle. What must be sought in an investigation of the Rig is, not simply odd passages or quotations which may be used in support of a particular theory, but broad, general principles of belief. To give an instance, 110 passage in the Veda is more familiar and perhaps more remarkable than the famous statement, they call him Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni, and, he is, the celestial, well-winged Garutmat. Sages name variously that which is but one, they call it Agni, Yama, Madarisvan. Asterisk here, it may be said, we reach monotheism at a bound. Here is an explanatory statement in the earliest portion of the Veda, giving the general practice and belief. And towards the close of the ryle we read similarly, the wise, in their hymns, represent, under many forms, the well-winged, God, who is but one. I value these passages very greatly, but the argument in favor of archaic monotheism must not be allowed to rest upon them alone, or upon any other similar passages elsewhere. And we must be cautious not to strain them, thus it may be asked who is the, him / the it / and the well-winged. It is easy to reply that the deity is undoubtedly meant, and such very likely may be the case, but the great commentator Yaska, BC 400, applied the former passage to Agni, whilst Sayana thought that Surya, the sun, was intended. However, ere examining the principal Vedic concepts, we may remember Rig Veda, Inclusive. 46. The translations of Vedic passages are chiefly taken from Dr. Muir's Sanskrit texts, and occasionally from the work of the late Professor Wilson, continued by Professor Cowell. Ibid Exxiv. 5d34m with comfort a statement of Professor Tiller, which is not based upon any particular passage or passages, but upon a wide and which has careful investigation my warmest assent, Olfictahian subojalet p rishiasut sat meeting t nelt, the ancient religion, after the rust of ages has been removed, will come out in all its purity and brightness, and the image which it discloses will be the image of the Father of all the nations upon earth. 19. The Vedic divinities. The principle of explaining the concept of a mythologico-religious being from the signification of his name, is one which has of late been employed with the most distinguished success, and therefore a first step towards determining archaic Vedic faith is to tabulate the Vedic divinities and to notice the meaning of their names. The following are the principal personifications or divine personages of the Rig Veda, Aditi. The boundless. The infinite the infinite personified, Mailar. Mother of the 7 or 8 Adityas, namely, Varuna, Mitra, Aryaman, Amsa, Bhaga, Daksha, Agni, and Martanda. The passages do not absolutely agree respecting the names of the Adityas. Agni. The Slavonic Oni. Lat Ignis. The igneous principle, which shows itself alike in the terrestrial, aerial, and heavenly flame, visible and invisible. The Agile. Amsa. The sympathizer, Eoth. The sharer, tile. Portion, Whitney. Very rarely mentioned. Ariaman. The favorer, Roth. Protector, Whitney. Closely connected with Mitra, and sometimes we Asura.nco Rtasetaliavdian.I Fijed larly mentioned, who with the Iranian Ahriman is often called Fayasnduro Anofashwarvinpa.Artako Asvins. The horsemen. Sons of Asva, the son Ienthiespa Israpakatiorfsaar, Ako Earl.Dstic Ktrh.e, two powers which seemed incorporated in the coming and going of each day and each night, Ma'iller. In the west the Dioskauroi, Castor, and Pollux. Baga. The distributor. Fortune, Whitney. The * Introduction to the Science of Religion, 67. J. Vidi Professor Ma'iller's course of lectures on the origin and growth of religion. J. Vidi Sup. Sector 11. Hogg, Essays, 269. Of. Psalm 19. 5 Wendy Bogu. The name became at an early date Aabd Bararikashamgsap.nitrisa.pl Toth dt.she and Tneltalithlriayanal Nuud for PDTR, Haurafo Egtsro.e, dl.slosum Dofnhegasptia Hueosif Ziralago at Gene *li. Uthhietnapia, w.erf Uldatenschwales pra, nl Genovermo Amta, d.iti Insight and Oddity from Duksha. Oddity was produced, she who is thy lie auditsa.ught taer, Oshtinakris.haf the bright. J the heaven and Ahiranel by Ergeikta trbh, hmia.ivlenrg, og. Old Ebn Zeruism.Brermeyer.k of Elithheimsnerses of golden address to this divinity. The poet in the beginning there arose exclaims, the source of golden light he was the one born Lord of all that is. He established the earth, and this sky, who is the God to whom we shall offer our sacrifice. He who gives life, he who gives strength, whose command all the bright gods revere, whose shadow is immortality, whose shadow is death, he through whom the sky is bright and the earth firm, he through whom the heaven was stablished, nay the highest heaven. He who is the sole life of the bright gods, he who alone is God above all gods, he the creator of the earth, he the righteous, who created the heaven. Indra. The rain giver. The name is probably derived from Indu, the Zeus Ombrios, Jupiter Pluvius, who with his thunderbolt destroys the rain-concealing demon and sets free the refreshing waters. Peculiarly Indian divinity who, from the local characteristics of the country, became almost the head of the pantheon. If the Iranians knew him at all, which is very doubtful, they degraded him by making him into a demon Maruts. The crusher's foot the storm winds. Greek, Ares. Latin, Mars. * tile, Outlines of the History of the Ancient Religions, 109. Rig Veda, XICI. 14 Vidi Sup. Sector 12. Rig Veda, XICI. J. Translated by Professor Max Ma'iller in his History of Ancient Sanskrit Literature, 569. F. Vidi Darms Teder, Omazd Vidi Hogg, Essays, 272. E.T. Ahriman, 260, E.T.Seq. Foot the above is the generally received interpretation. M. Darms Teder prefers, however, to render Marat or Marut man, Vidi Ormazd Et.4/Irunu, 164. D2ITT, 36 Mitra. The friend. Iranian Mithra * nearly always mentioned in connection with Varuna. T. Prithivi. The broad earth. Greek, Platus. Purusha. The male. The Purusha Sulta % gives a somewhat pantheistic account of the deity under this name. The poet says Purusha has 1,000 heads, eyes, feet. Purusha himself is the whole universe, whatever has been, whatever shall be. He is the Lord of immortality. All existing things are a quarter of him, and that which is immortal in the sky is 3/4 of him. The moon was produced from his soul, the sun from his eye, Indra and Agni from his mouth, and Vayu from his breath. Pushan. Rudra. Shthitaguroibstelhi.protuhixer.p erso, Chni Igli, forms an excellent illustration of the principal nomina numina, and of the utter baselessness of many of the bugbears which have frightened millions of mankind for ages. His name in origin is only an adjective applied to Agni. Thus we read Agni, the brilliant, the terrible i.e. Rudra. Agni, the terrible, Rudra, king, the golden-formed. Rudra as Ans until as Sarva, the distinct Siva, divinity continued to increase in the gracious, a euphemism for wrathful, he attained almost the first the Hindu pantheon, becoming God, Megastheus. His dread the Mahadeva, or consort Kali, the impervious title P. Log Creaton Black, was merely originally one of the 7 fire tongues of Agni. In such instances as these we see polytheism developing before our eyes, many made out of one. Savitri. The vivifier, Tile, the inspirer, Cox. A solar phase. Soma. Intoxication, Canon Rawlinson. Originally the moist, humid, and watery element in nature, foot also closely connected with Agni. Asterisk Vidi Sup. Cs. 15, 16. Mitra and Varuna are the subject of a recent monograph by Dr. Hilbrandt, Varuna und Mitra, Breslau, 1877. J. Rigveda, XXC. An early instance of symbolical monstrosity, a principle which has often made art hideous. Apud Muir, Sanskrit Texts, v. 368, et sec. The hymn affords an exact parallel to some of the later Egyptian hymns to the pantheistic sun god. F. Vidi the archaic solar cult Big Veda, 3-2. 5 of Egypt. By the writer. Ibid. 4. 3-1. Foot Vidi Sup. Sector 13, INF Sector 29. Soma is a liquid Agni. Surya. The shining, Tile. Greek, Helios, Latin, Sol, the Sunday. Tvashtun. The creator, Lenormand. The maker A, Mailler. Solar Hephaestos. Ushas. The called Ahana. Dawn. Greek, Athena, Eos, As, the brilliant Auos. And also Saranu, Greek, Aranis, the running light. Varuna. The coverer, Tile. Greek, Auranos. The god of heaven, the Ahura, and head of the Vedic pantheon. After having ruled in the oversea, Varuna in later times was degraded to the undersea, and became an Okeanos *Vaju. The gentler wind. Of. Lat Favonius. The spirit breath of heaven. Vishnu. The penetrator, Gubernates. The sun, as striding across heaven. Vivasvad. The brilliant, Roth. Heavenly light and the sun. Yama. The twin. Of. Lat Gemini. The Iranian Yuma, who reigned in the happy golden age of the past. By Yama and his twin sister Yami some understood day and night, or light and darkness. Yama is especially the western or setting sun. He reigns over the departed, for to die is but to go away, and the fathers, the elder worthies of the human race, dwell with Yama in bliss in the unseen world. Such, then, are the principal divinities of the Rig Veda. There are also many minor figures, goddesses, who play unimportant parts, for a goddess, to use an Assyrian express Zion, is originally merely the reflection of her husband god J. Ideal personifications, such as Vach, voice/Srada, faith/ and the like, compound names for the supreme divinity, and other heterogeneous concepts, but the foregoing list contains all, or nearly all, the personages of any real importance. 20. Analysis of the Vedic divinities. Reckoning the Asvins and the Maruts as each one personage, the list contains 29 names, from which we may at once deduct the 3 special phases of Agni, namely, Cf the position of the Homeric Okeanos, Kiktavo tf, QTSVYS, 214. 301-2, 38 Brahmanaspati, Brihaspati, and Rudra. 26, on analysis, appear as follows, I phenomenal objects. The remaining 39-21. Natural objects merely so regarded. In the present day, when knowledge and research have so vastly extended, and when whole books are written on single divinities, it is of course utterly impossible in a brief paper to give anything like a complete representation of the facts, or a full justification of the views adopted. But it is quite possible to indicate a general method of treatment, and, I venture to add, to advance very strong arguments in its favor. Nor is further investigation either into the researches of original students, or by such students themselves, likely, in my judgment, to turn the monotheistic position here adopted. Have a number of names, an apparent polytheism, but in origin a real monotheism. To begin with infinite space, heaven, earth, dawn, wind, and tempest, 6 of these 26 figures. As far as I am aware, there is no passage in the Rig which necessarily implies that any one of them was regarded by any poet as an absolutely sentient being of divine nature. As to Aditi, the infinite, she is of course in one point of view mother of everything and of every personage which infinite space contains, but she is no real divinity, being essentially a mere negation, the not bounded, and space itself is mainly unsubstantial extension. Heaven and earth, again, broadly regarded as the two halves of the all, heaven being all that is above, and earth all that is below, are, anthropomorphically speaking, father and mother of men and things in many a cosmogony, but, as in the case of Aditi, and as in that of speech, the Greek Auranos and Gaia, this is thus, the ancient song of Dodona Aram Eretiv Higerertov sends forth her fruit, therefore call the earth mother. Dios, in the east, is but a name, in the west he is the true God-Father, Zeus. Conversely, Auranos in the west is but a name, in the east is of he is the true God-Father, opinion that epithets of C. Varuna immoral the Ahura. Drive or spiritual nature mur are applied to the Vedic Dios and Prithivi, but such terms as innocuous, beneficent, wise, promoters of righteousness, by no means necessarily contain such an implication. Thus, for instance, the righteousness spoken of is merely cosmic order, of which heaven and earth are, of course, the two great subporters. Physical, the wisdom of heaven is no more than that of the sun who sees all things / and therefore is said to know all things. Beautiful hymns are addressed to Ushas, the dawn, but there is little, if anything, in them which a modern poet might not have written, and there is not a tittle of evidence to show that the ancient poet regarded Ushas otherwise 40 than a modern Aryan bard would do. Chateaubriand writes, the dawn peeps in at the window, she paints the sky with red, and over our loving embraces her rosy rays are shed. She looks on the slumbering world, love, with eyes that seem divine, but can she show on her lips, love, a smile as sweet as thine? There is no mystery here, simply a constant working of the anthropomorphic principle. And so the Vedic Ushas, daughter of the sky, sister of night, bride of the sun, mistress of the world, kinswoman of Varuna, divine, immortal, golden-hued, as we have seen, smiles upon the earth, and to her, to the region whence all drawn light springs, go holy souls after death. J again, Vayu, the wind, touches the sky, and is swift as thought. He does not occupy a prominent position in the Rig Veda, but is very closely connected with Indra, as ruling the middle region. The Maruts are a troop of winds, sometimes said to be 27 in number, sometimes 180. They attend and aid Indra, the god of the bright heaven, who drives away darkness by storm. Thus, this group of divinities, on examination, disappear absolutely, not merely to ourselves, but to the Vedic Indian. They stand confessed as the ordinary phenomena of nature, and nothing more. 22. The forms of deity. 20 personages remain. Let us next take the group of forms of deity. Duksha is merely a personification of intelligence, or intelligent will, which will, as noticed, even producate infinite amsa, whose or sharer space. Whose name very rarely will occurs, that is the of the Ahura. Sympathizer, but who sympathizes with mankind, or divides it the good things of existence save the Ahura. Distributor, is merely another of his names is evident, amongst other reasons, from the fact that Bhaga became a general name for God amongst the Slavs, and therefore belonged to the period of Aryan unity. He who is Amsa is Bhaga, and both, as noticed, are Adityas. Hiranyagarbha and Purusha are later philosophical concepts of God, they are therefore identical with each other and with Ahura. *Vide sup. Sector 6. T. Apud Victor Hugo, The History of a Crime, 3. 27 J. Rig Veda, X. Eth. 8 sup. Sector 19. 41 Lastly, there is of shadows, we Ahura touch and hear at earth. The length, amid Ahura is God. This world 23. The Sunday. So far all has been simple, we have examined 12 names and found one divinity. But it is far from my intention to attempt to free the Vedic Indians from the charge of polytheism, as a body they certainly were or became polytheistic, and we can easily see how and why. The time to which our attention is turned is the commencement of the Vedic age, and we observe how numbers of the gods resolve themselves into we simile. But others are of a different character. Next come to natural objects connected with spiritual power, and here is the stronghold of Vedic polytheism. And yet even here the evidence of previous monotheism is almost, if not quite, as strong. To take first the sun and the sun god, Savitri, Surya, Vishnu, Vivasvat, and Yama are each the sun. For mankind, however, there is but a single sun, they are, therefore, really identical. It is possible that there may have been a time when they were regarded as 5 distinct, objective, sentient personages or solar gods. But there must have been a time when the one had not yet become 5, for thus to divide and classify requires an elaborate mental effort, and a corresponding period for its development. This division of the sun and of the sun god is familiar. Thus in Egypt we find the diurnal and nocturnal sun, Ba, the midday sun, Keeper, the prolific sun, Harmaku, the horizon sun, Turn, the setting sun, Mentu, the rising sun, Fenti, the climbing sun, Atumu, the Thonian sun, Harpakrut, the newborn wintry sun, Aten, the power of the solar disk, Uasar, Osiris, the suffering sun, and the like. The Vedic sun proper is Surya, whose name reappears in the Greek Helios and the Latin Sol, and as these are simply names of the solar photosphere and not of the solar divinity, we may fairly conclude that Surya in origin similarly signified the physical sun, just as Ushas means the dawn. Surya, in the hymns, is the son of Aditi, the son of Dayas, the husband of Elchhaz, and the eye of Mitra, Varuna, and Agni, expressions which require no comment. In Savitri the solar power rises higher. Savitri is an Ahura, he is especially praised by Varuna, Mitra, and Aryaman, with whom he works in harmonious concert. He is the lord of all creatures and the bestower of immortality, he is the sender of blessings, is prayed to deliver his votary from sin and to convey Aikvita. 4. Lib 3, 42 The holy soul to the abode of the righteous He is preeminently the god of golden luster, and as a matter of course is sometimes distinguished from Surya, and sometimes identified with him, Surya, speaking generally, being the body, and Savitri, the spirit, of the sun. Altogether, Savitri in position and general concept very closely resembles the Iranian Mithra and, with Mitra. Hence we are Vishnu, not surprised to find the penetrator, is him the identified sun from whose heat nothing is hid, who, forcing his way up from the underworld, crosses heaven in again into the hidden region. Jt Viharvies Vsadra id is thained Briplilniat Hundratus a minor solar phrase. 24 Yama. Savitri, who can free from sin and who conveys the soul after death to bliss, glides into Yama and becomes identical with him. In India, as in Egypt, the sun received different names during the different portions of his career, and Yama, as connected with the death of man, and of the sun, and with the unseen world, with the West, is associated with his name, twin/setting sun, and is mysterious. Hence Professor Roth considers him a representative of one of the original pair of mortals, but this view Professor Miller rejects. Had the locus been Egypt, I should have been inclined to regard the twins as the sun nocturnal and diurnal, but here there is not sufficient authority for such an opinion. I have already mentioned other conjectures. In the 9th and 10th books of the Rig Veda, Yama is prominently introduced in connection with the doctrine of a future life and the state of the fathers, the departed worthies of the human race. In the Atharvaveda read, Reverencia Yama, the son of Vivasvat, the assembler of men, in the unseen world, who was the first of men that died, and the first that departed to this, celestial, world F, and this is but the slightly later echo of the Eik, worship with an oblation King Yama, son of Vivasvat, * Rig Veda, X 17. 4 F Ibid v Ihsi. 4 J Vidi. The explanation of the Vishnu myth by the ancient commentator or Nabab Ha, a predecessor of Yaska, Apudmur, Sanskrit texts, 464. Sup. Sector 19. The western sun is the sun of the brilliant midday sun, Atharvaveda, 18. 313. 43 The assembler of men, who departed to the mighty streams * and spied out the road for many, Yama was the first who found for us the way. This home is not to be taken from us. Depart thou, depart by the ancient paths whither our early fathers have departed. There thou shalt see the two kings Yama and the god Varuna, meet with the fathers, meet with Yama, in the highest heaven. Throwing off all imperfection, go to thy home. Become united to a body, and clothed in a shining form / J. According to the Atharvaveda, death is the messenger of Yaniya, who conveys the spirits of men to the abode of their forefathers. Here, then, is the august figure of the sun god dwelling in celestial light, in the inmost sanctuary of heaven, with the Ahura Varuna and the elder worthies of the human race. In the sun god we met with a second undoubted divinity. 25 The semi-solar light gods. I pass on to the semi-solar light gods. Aryaman, the favorer / one of the Adityas, is seldom mentioned, and generally with Varuna and Mitra, of whom he is a phase. The favorers of man are the Ahura of heaven and the kindly sun god. Gods, and Hdaviamais etnerdiofwies needsvayas and staritumo and vouchwe orn swofict hesperim get incorporated in the coming and going of each day and each night. 1 Indra, the god of the bright heaven and slayer of the monster of darkness, is a purely Indian divinity, unknown even to the period of Indo-Iranian unity. He is another aspect of Varunadayas, whom he to a great extent superseded, and affords a good example of the polytheistic advance. He was certainly regarded as a distinct personage, but as he is not pre-Vedic, the circumstance is immaterial to the monotheistic position. Mitra, the Iranian Mithra, is a veritable divinity, belonging to the period of the Indo-Iranian unity. I shall notice him further when speaking of Varuna, with whom he is, ettq Tavalopod 235, I think it quite possible that originally the twins were Varuna Yama Savitri. CFC the two divine Mithras, Sup. Sector 15. T Big Veda, X 14. S Muir, Sanskrit texts, V 303, I Rig Veda, 9th. 7 T Professor Miller, Lectures on the Science of Language, 2. 5377 and H almost invariably associated he is identified with Savitri. Ibnachhianim and Tshhe and, as mentioned * growth producer / is a phase and name of the sun god. Pushan guides on journeys and to the unseen world, aids in the revolution of day and night, is an Ahura, knows all things, presides over Marriage, and conducts the souls of the departed. He is Yama Savitri. Tvashtri is a personification of skill in divine workmanship, an Indian Hephaestos. still meet with no absolute separate divinity except the Ahura and the divine solar and light god, whose names are numberless. He is in reality the Savitri Yamamitra Pushan. So far as I am aware, Savitri, Pushan, and Tvashtri are purely Indian appellations, whilst Yama and Mitra belong to the earlier period. 26 Varuna. Professor Mutter has remarked that an advantage which the Veda offers is this, that in its numerous hymns we can still watch the gradual growth of the gods, the slow transition of appellations into personification, parandarthnat me st hate fi fly ursanti tentative steps towards that the various deities are but different names, different conceptions of that incomprehensible being which no thought can reach and no language express, is not yet quite extinct in the minds of some of the more thoughtful among the Vedic bards. This being is especially mirrored in the Vedic Varuna, whose name belongs to the period of Aryan unity, and who is identified by many with the Varuna of the Vendidad. Varuna is the coverer, FC the encompasser, the all-surrounding, all-space-filling. He is preeminently the Ahura J and the king, Naja, king of the universe, king of all that exists, king of gods and men, universal monarch, far-sighted and thousand-eyed. He made the revolving sun to shine, the wind is his breath, he witnesses man's truth and falsehood, through him it is that though all the rivers run into one ocean yet they never fill it, his laws are immutable, and they rest upon him as on a mountain. He has fashioned and upholds heaven and earth, and dwells in all worlds, lives through all life, extends through all extent, spreads undivided, operates unspent. He is frequently celebrated alone and frequently together with Mitra, and between the two the closest harmony exists. *Sub. Sector 23. F. Lectures on the Science of Language, 2. 454 T. The epithet Ahura is frequently applied to Varuna in particular. Muir, Sanskrit Texts, v. 61. Of Ecclesiastes I7. 45 Mitra, on the other hand, is hardly ever hymned alone. Varuna and Mitra together are styled sun-eyed, kings, strong, terrible, Nidra, divine, Ahura, upholders of the earth and sky, placers of the sun in heaven, guardians of the world, awful divinities, haters of the lie, acquainted with heaven and earth, lords of truth and light who made wise the simple, and avengers and removers of sin. In a word, Varuna is the Ahura, God Almighty, and Mitra is the high and holy sun god, ever in the closest union and harmony with him. Varuna can only be beheld in beatific vision. When I have obtained a vision of Varuna, I have regarded his luster as resembling that of Agni. Plus, as Sir G. W. Coxwell observes, a pure monotheistic conviction is preeminently seen in the following prayer: J. Left me not yet, Varuna, enter into the house of clay, have mercy, Almighty, have mercy. If I go along trembling like a cloud driven by the wind, have mercy, Almighty, have mercy. Whenever we men, Varuna, commit an offense before the heavenly host, whenever we break thy law, have mercy, Almighty, have throgate mercy. Thoughtlessness, and here we may inquire, is Varuna, the Ahura, identical with Ahura Mazda? Windish man thought not, and Professor Spiegel seems inclined to agree with him, but, on the other hand, Profs. Koth and Whitney are strongly in favor of the identity, which certainly is not denied either by Professor Miller or Dr. Muir, whilst in my opinion, the recent researches of M. Darmstetter demonstrate their unity beyond reasonable doubt. With the degradation of Varuna, the gradual process by which he was at length reduced to complete insignificance, I am not here concerned. 27 Tliamashaspentas and the Adityas. As Ahura Mazda stands at the head of 6 divine personages, the good mind, truth, power, piety, health, and immortality, the whole forming a sevenfold aspect of the one, so, Ahura Varuna stands at the head of 6 personages: the friend, the favorer, the sympathizer, the distributor, the intelligent. I omit for brevity references to texts in support of each of these statements. T. Rigveda, 7. I. 2. J. Mythology of the Aryan Nations, I. 331. Translated by Professor Miller in his History of Sanskrit Literature, 540. J. J. Ormazd E. T. Araman, 1877. 46. And the personified fire, a corresponding group though not perhaps quite so severely monotheistic. Mithra, excluded by an intensity of monotheism from the Iranian seven, appears amongst the Vedic seven *, but alike in both regions the gods, when traced to their origins, resolve themselves into Ahura and Mithra, Ajura and Mitra. 28. Martanda, the eighth Aditya. In Rigveda, X 72, we read, "Let us celebrate with exaltation the births of the gods." In the earliest age of the gods, the existent sprang from the non-existent. And after mentioning Aditi as the daughter of Daksha, the poet continues, "When Ye, gods, like devotees, replenished the worlds, then Ye disclosed the sun which had been hidden in the ocean. Of the other sons who were born from the body of Aditi, she approached the gods with seven, but cast away Martada. For birth as well as for death she disclosed Martanda Thethfirig Mopi and Erk Tapnat Saska et Apud Hadibtridhmaadni if Suazans.com Bimu etunt chi orn are only seven whom men call the A.Daitya deities. For she produced the eighth, destitute of any modifications of shape, without hands and feet, etc. He was a smooth one lump. Smiley face, Roth and Darms Tedder render Martanda bird, in which case we should bird, but an anda, death. Ptr hoefev.bigramiyat if lilratier florimanel datamaris matnthu or hsnteosenfij fatunrio if myapam nrgodial tun iadux he gtgh/egx divide luaotrf. I do not think that such imperfection is intended. Martanda * 4 instances of the recurrence of the number 7, Vidi the Great Dionysic Myth, 2. 225, T Brahmana signifies, et sec. That which relates to prayer, Brahman. The Brahmanas form the Vedas, being divided second portion of Vedic into Sanhita, Brahmana, literature, and Sutra. Each of the or band for the Brahmanas are founded upon the Sanhita, and the Sutras mainly upon the Brahmanas. The chief object of the latter is to connect the sacrificial songs and formulas with the sacrificial rite. Find in them the oldest rituals, the oldest linguistic explanations, the oldest traditional narratives, and the oldest philosophical speculations. Weber, History of Indian Literature, 2nd edit 1878, p. 12, Apud Muir, Sanskrit Texts, 4. 1517 differs from his seven brethren in two respects, in form and in being subject to death. Now his seven immortal brethren are of divine form, and it is undoubtedly implied that the divine form is also more or less anthropomorphic, but Martanda is an egg, a circle * a lump without hands and feet, in a word, the solar photosphere, the golden egg of the heavens, which dies daily. Martanda is, as it were, thrown out by Aditi from the company of the gods and the splendors of the invisible world, into the inferior, visible, and material world, to live and die daily in the sight of men. He is thus a type of the humiliation of the divine nature by its alliance with material form and subjection to death, and so the converse of Yama, in which we see the human nature raised to the divine and perfected. And even the glorious Sun himself, protagonist of materiality, when disgraced by idolatry becomes to us as it were Martanda, an addled egg, even as that venerable relic the brazen serpent became Nehushtan, for are the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth, they shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. J. 29. Soma. The Vedic divinity Soma affords an excellent instance of the process by which the human mind constantly converts into obscure mysteries things in themselves exceedingly simple. Soma is, 1. A plant, the juice of which was largely used in connection with religious ritual, and, 2. The principle of humidity, which shows itself in rain, sap, dew, and otherwise. In illustration of this, it may be observed that in several passages and at moon of is of the Atharvaveda Soma stated that the sun Soma, that is to say, is identified with the moon, has the nature of Agni, the sun is igneous, the moon humid. The moon is the night queen, and the night is the time and of growth, symbolized by humidity generally. Thus the increasing moon, Apollo is Saroktonas, the lizard slayer, for the lizard was a symbol of humidity. Plato's commendation of the circular form in the Timaeus may be accepted except so far as a tangible sentient divinity is concerned. God must be more or less anthropomorphic, and will yet be the ntikwv tovphakoi, tove of drove. Such af the egg sun is familiar in Egypt, vide the archaic solar cult of Egypt. By the writer. In the frontispiece to the great Dionysiac myth, Vol. 2, I have given a Hellenico-Egyptian representation of the winged sun, Dionysus, vide Pausanias, 319, supported by the twin serpents of plenty. Jaja x 11. Vide sup. Sector 13. One of the Akkadian names of the moon is Enzuna, the Lord of Growth. Of Deuteronomy XXXIII. 14, the precious things put forth by the moon. Pliny, XXXIV. 848. We because supposed to live upon the dew, can therefore easily see the process by which soma or humidity generally became identified with the moon, the queen of humidity. Soma is the Iranian Hauma, the Omomi of Plutarch *, and the whole of the 9th book of the Rig Veda is devoted to its praise, illimitable power, benefit, and efficacy being ascribed to the personified King Soma, the Ahura. Now, after making all due allowance for the wonder and delight which may have been produced in the human mind by wine, using that word in a general sense, and also for man's appreciation of, and thankfulness for, moisture in its various forms, there still remains something unexplained and mysterious in the intensity of the Soma cult and in the apparent extravagance of the Soma laudation. But the great idea behind these lower ones involves man's yearning for continued existence, and the line of thought is as follows: moisture, drink, wine of heaven, water of life, renews the face of the earth, man, and nature in the present physical and visible state of things. But man is to live hereafter in another and a higher world, then must there be some subtle nectar, some elixir of immortality, which, when procured, shall be in him as a well of water springing up into everlasting life. This is the true swana, of which the other is but the shadow, nor can it be too highly praised, too ardently desired. This view alone enables us to understand such aspirations as the following: where there is eternal light, in the world where the sun is placed, in that immortal imperishable world place me, Soma. Where life is free, in the third heaven of heavens, where the worlds are radiant there make me immortal. Where there is happiness and delight, where joy and pleasure reside, where the desires of our desire are attained, there make me immortal. And this poetic prayer we might transcribe in words more familiar: may he who is the light of light dwelling in the world, whose sun goes not down, whose service is perfect freedom, in whose presence there is fullness of joy, and at whose right hand there are pleasures for evermore, clothe our mortal with immortality in the third heaven of heavens. Speaking elsewhere of Dionysus as Theoenos, I have considered *4. Perry Island. JKOS. Sylvie the deity who is, as an ancient Rig Veda, 9. Xiath Christian Lampetests, 7. W. B. Cooper, In Faith and Free Thought, 246. 2 Cor 12. 2 1 Kings 8. 2749. The Vedic Soma, Iranian Hauma, the Assyrian cc water of life, the drink of the gods / the living water of Egypt, the mead in the halls of Odhin, and the bowls of wine in the wee garden of delight of Bachos Theoenos, the Quran, I observed, and in summing up the phase recognize reverence for the principle of humidity, without which all is parched and sterile, when earth pants and gasps under the influence of the burning typhon, the scorching dog star of ruin, the choking rain restraining Yedic snake, or the consuming Athamas. Opposed to these are the all-fostering Okeanos, the rivers, symbols of the force and flow of life, the beloved Zeus rain, and Dionysus lord and first cause, not only of wine, but of the whole humid nature *. But, secondly, and distinct from the foregoing train of thought, is the yearning for immortality coupled with the idea that as ordinary food and drink sustain ordinary mortal existence, so superhuman nourishment, angels' food, will sustain, or is required to sustain, the immortal life, which it is possible for some at least to become possessed of. 30. The physical Agni. A single Yedic divinity remains for examination, Agni, who stands in the front rank, and whose importance at once appears by the fact that no less than 53 out of 191 hymns of the first book of the Rig are addressed to him either solely or with others. But Agni, who is seen in the West as Ignis, a name, not a god, is a vast and difficult concept. Stranger in Plato's Sophists, Matye therefore, object of sayar with the inquiry is no trivial thing, but a very various and complicated one. This is a very questionable animal, one not to be caught with the left hand, as the saying is. Agni appears in almost as many aspects as Osiris, and therefore the question for consideration is, what concept of Agni will include all other narrower and derivative concepts, and hold true throughout their divergent modifications? Working from the known to the unknown, from the obvious to the obscure, we notice Agni in his first and simplest phase as ordinary terrestrial fire, and as such he is described in the hymns with great power and variety of imagery. Thus, he is the son of the 10 fingers and of the 2 sticks, wriggles like a serpent, cannot be * Plutarch, Peri is Chios. XXXVT. The Great Dionysic Myth, 2. 111 tr. As W. Mackay, the Sophists to the Suastika, a word of Plato, p. 89. Which, according to some, is equivalent E50 suckled by his mother, is butter-fed, and wind-driven, sees through gloom, has blazing hair, a golden beard, sharp weapons and burning teeth, is footless and headless, thousand-eyed, thousand-horned, all-devouring, roars like thunder, like the wind, like a lion, bellows like a bull, has 100 manifestations, and is the youngest of divinities, because constantly produced. These physical epithets and characteristics require no explanation, but what a world of simile and symbolism is involved in them, leading to subsequent trope and metaphor still more obscure, and thus to mythologico-religious mystery. So the web of mythology is woven, and here we behold its pristine simplicity. And now let me ask, with what mental feeling did these Vedic Indians regard the Agni which they produced day by day? Did they crudely worship the mere flame in fetishistic imbecility? To believe this would be to give the lie direct to every noble passage in the Veda, even to the very existence of these hymns, for no fetish worshipper would ever have produced a single strophe. Be fetishism ancient as well as modern, or modern only, that the Yedic poets were infinitely superior to such groveling concepts is as certain as any fact in history. Let those who are compelled by the necessities of theories of evolution, physical and mental, persistently endeavor to degrade archaic man. Free thought, truly so called, is warped by no such trammels, and, whilst fully admitting that the deity might, in the abstract, have worked by evolution as well as in any other way, believes that there is no real evidence he has done so, and that the whole theory is not proven. And yet I would remark, in passing, that a man cannot fairly be made answerable for the follies of his extreme followers, and that I respect the caution and wonderful powers of observation of a Darwin, as much as I despise the baseless dogmas of a Haeckel. The Indian Aryan, then, may not have known that heat was but a mode of to sfft as the sign of good wishes, p. Vidi Schleman, Troy, and its remains, 101, etseq, wearing, ceramic art in remote ages, plate sliv. It appears equally in Akkad. The ideograph J with the determinative of wood, certainly appears to contain the elements of the primitive fire stick. Mr. St. Chad Boscawen in Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, 6. 281, the investigation into the pictorial meaning of the ordinary Assyrian cuneiform which, through the archaic Babylonian, still in numbers of instances directly or indirectly represents the object or idea signified by the word, is a study of the highest interest, and one which promises very important results. *Gf Yavish the Hephaestos I Jovinus. T. Vide Professor Max Miller's paper, Is Fetishism a Primitive Form of Religion? Macmillan, June 1878. 51 motion / But he certainly did know that flame was but flame. And why, then, did he so reverence it, for its physical aspect does not fully explain his respect. Because he knew that the mere ordinary earthly flame, born so mysteriously, is but the last and lowest link in a wondrous chain, which includes all fire, life aerial and celestial, all light, a chain which descends from all heat, and hence all the abode of those primeval heats whereby all life has lived, from the dwelling place of him who is a consuming fire. And this aspect of Agni will explain why the different divinities are identified with him, and also his varied parentage. Thus, he is the son of heaven and earth, because they, regarded as the two halves of the all, necessarily include the sum total of igneous effulgence. He is the son of Dios alone, for he manifests himself in the visible sky, in lightning, and in the sun. He is English poet produced tells us, by the dawn, light a time shoots when, like as an old streak of subtle fire. He is produced by Indra between two clouds, struck together like the sticks on earth. He is made by the gods, yet conversely he is also their sire, for without Agni how could mortals know aught of the bright Devas, or how could they even exist? Lastly, he is the son of Daksha and Aditi, that is to say, he is the manifestation of the Supreme Spirit throughout space. Whatever produces or occasions light and heat is the sire or mother of Agni, and the result is real consistency accompanied by an apparent contradiction. 31 Agni, a combination and manifestation of the Vedic divinities. Let us next notice how the Vedic divinities are identified with and combined in Agni. Read, Thou Agni, art Indra, thou art Vishnu, the wide-stepping, thou, Brahmanaspati, art a priest * Agni, when kindled, is Mitra, Yarana is Javata / all-possessing, a frequent epithet of Agni. Thou, Agni, art born Yarana, thou art Aryaman in relation to maidens, in thee, son of strength, are all the gods. Thou, Agni, art the royal Yarana, thou art Aryaman, thou art Tvashtri, Rig Veda, 2. I3. T Ibid 3. V4. 2J Ibid V3. 1, 2. 52 Thou art Mitra, thou art Yudra, as Pushan, thou cherishest those who offer worship. Thou art the divine Savitri, thou art Bhaga * thou encompassest the gods as the circumference the spokes, of a wheel, by the sacred radiance of Agni Varuna, Mitra, Aryaman, and Bhaga shine, and through him they triumph, for he is the immortal sustainer of the universe, exempt from death. Whatever other fires there may be, they are but ramifications, Agni, of the by the, Agni, Varuna, and Mitra and Aryaman are animated. So that thou hast been born comprehending them all, universally in all functions, and encompassing, as the circumference the spokes Agni is associated with heaven and earth, as, a husband with, one only wife. Ffi, Agni, am the living breath of threefold nature, the measure of the firmament, eternal warmth. I offer praise to Agni, the Creator, the first. He who has hidden darkness within light. He has spread out the two sustaining worlds, like two skins, Vaisvanara comprehends all energy. Steady light, swifter than thought, stationed among moving beings to show the way to happiness. Agni knows all that exists, appropriates the prayers addressed to the eternal Creator. Elsewhere a poet exclaims, may our sin, Agni, be repented of. And Agni, who is styled Ahura, is besought to preserve from *Ik Veda, 2 I Ibid Ixli. 9 * Ibid Ixli. 9 Ibid V15. 1 F Ibid V13. 6 Ibid I Sliv. 5 FF Ibid 3. 7 4. J Ibid 8. 19 F Ibid I X6. 1 IT 3. XXVI 7. He like Ibid Mitra, 6. 8 3. The Friend. Vice Vinara, 1T1F signifies Ibid 6. 9-5. Who is beneficial to all, Ibid 3. 12-4. TTT Ibid ICI. 1. On this passage Wilson observes, this looks as if a first cause were recognized, distinct from Agni and the elemental deities. Rigveda Sanhita, I-190, TTJ Ibid, Iskai. 153 Sin ** I have al-Redif quoted the celebrated passage where Agni is said to be a name of the One, and is identified with Yama. As throughout this paper I have as much as possible avoided, though by no means ignored, the mythological element, I shall not quote here any of the numerous passages which treat of the physical functions of Agni in connection with the Devas. But, on the foregoing extracts, we may observe that the identifications are not to be regarded as implying a strict and absolute monotheism, as if there were really only one God, Agni. What they undoubtedly show is that all the divinities are of the same igneous nature, and that Agni who, in his lowest manifestation is ordinary earthly flame, in his highest is identical with Yarana himself, is the Ahura, ultimate source of all light, heat, life, and energy. Agni as the ritual fire, is a priest and sage, messenger and link between God and man, and bears to heaven the prayers addressed to the eternal Creator. How clearly in these hymns we see the struggle between monotheism and polytheism. The poets are apparently inconsistent and contradictory, there is but one and yet there are many, but yet they are merely names of the one. Again and again through the increasing clouds of ignorance and error, the supreme form of the Ahura of heaven breaks forth, upon his children like the blue sky of his abode. J32. Agni the highest manifestation of divinity. It is stated that, the gods formed Agni for a threefold existence. According to the great commentator Yaska, BC 400, and his predecessor Sakapuni, this triadic existence refers to the igneous principle, 1, on earth, 2, in the air, and 3, in the sky, as fire, lightning, and sun. In another passage Yaska observes, owing to the greatness of the deity, the one soul is lauded in many ways. The different gods are members of the one soul. It is soul that is their car, steeds, weapon, Rig Veda, 6. 1512. F. Sup. Sector 18. J. Professor Miller Hebrew Prophets, observes that Vedic and Homeric singers poets, Zoroastrian had no name for worshippers, that which is the sky's own peculiar tint, the sky blue, the ceruleum. Contemporary Review, May, 1878, p. 230. I do not feel sure of this. The blue, formerly bluey sky, is the blue and or blown sky, from which the clouds are driven, equals so that the Forskmua, vault of heaven appears. Blue, and Samu, sky, in Assyrian the same ideograph stands therefore in Mesopotamian regions, blue sky color. Rig Veda, XICIL 10. 54 arrows, soul is a god's all. There are three deities according to the etymologists, Agni, whose place is on earth, Vayu or Indra, whose place is in the atmosphere, and Surya, whose place is in the sky. These receive many designations in consequence of their greatness or from the diversity of their functions. Yaska had before him the interpretations of Sakapuni and or Navabha, two very ancient and famous expounders of the Veda, so that he was well acquainted with archaic tradition, and Dr. Muir observes on the passage that, Agni, Vayu or Indra, and Surya appear to have been regarded in the time of Yaska as the triad of deities in whom the Supreme Spirit was especially revealed. And, according to Yaska, even these three agree in one, and are merely protagonistic manifestations of the only soul or spirit. But by this time the one spirit has become semi-pantheistic. According to a passage in the Atharva Veda, Agni becomes Varuna in the evening, rising in the morning he is Mitra, becoming Savitri he moves through the air, becoming Indra he glows in the middle of the sky. Agni is thus, that light whose smile kindles the universe. Highest and brightest manifestation of divinity, ignis ubique latet, naturam amplectator amum. And according to the Avesta, son of Ahura Mazda, giver of good, the greatest Yazida, J. And it is in this connection that Zarathustra styles himself the supreme fire priest, the priest of the Iranian Adish or Adar. Lastly, Agni, like Yama, conveys to bliss the soul of the righteous after death. When thou hast matured him, Jatavidas, then send him to the fathers. As for his unborn part F, do thou kindle it with thy heat, let thy flame and thy luster kindle it. Apud Mur, Sanskrit texts, 4. 160 F. Atharvaveda, 13. 313. J. Kurta Avesta, 11. Sup. Sector 10. Adar et dia 5 J. Sunt du formations de la même racine. 2 est impossible de se parer Adar du Vedic Athar, et entre Athar et d or J. Lya, quant a la racine, le anim rapport tu entre la racine manth, dans pra mantha et la racine pav dans trabo / Tuesday. Darmstetter, Ormazd et re man, 34, Note 3. If the germ of immortality. 55 With those forms of thine which are auspicious convey it to the world of the righteous. 33. The essence of the Vedic divinities. Such, then, are the Vedic divinities, from being few they become many. In various passages 33 gods are alluded to, but, according to others, there are 180 Maruts alone, and elsewhere it is said that 3,330-9 gods have worshipped Agni. Thus pantheons extend. As time goes on, other important figures appear upon the stage: Brahma, a personification of the magic power hidden in the sacred word and in prayers, F. Siva J. Krishna, but these are not yet divinities, and therefore do not concern us. Goddesses also play an important part, a sure sign of degeneration, the miserable doctrine of the transmigration of the soul, entirely unknown to the Rig Veda, makes its appearance to the torment of mankind, and, after many a weary age, including the reaction of Buddhism and its suppression, we reach a vague and atheistic pantheism or a groveling superstition, a truly remarkable instance of mental evolution, although at the same time undoubtedly a descent of man. And, amid the crowd of shadowy forms that make up the group of Vedic divinities, where do we find reality save in the Ahura, Yarana, Mitra, Surya Savitri, Yama, and Agni? And these, again, resolve themselves into God, the Sun God, and the universal spirit of divinity. They are all known elsewhere, alike in name, Ahura, Auranos, Mithra, Helios, Yuma, Oni, and in reality. 34 The law of circle. Thus we can see how, long ere the days of Zoroaster, there Big Veda, x16. Tj Tile, Siva, O Udal Hyendra Akviatas Ah Istamrari Alfithi Ancient Religions, 125. Euphemistic appellation of Sarva, the wrathful / and Sarva, in Torn, is cited as the Mahadeva, Megastheos, or Mgariel an epithet of Udrakan god. And Rudra, the terrible, is as noticed, subsector 19, merely an epithet of Agni, thus much out of little. The Hindu Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva, is a modern philosophical concept, arbitrarily attached to these names. Vaidhi Tile, outlines, 153, M. Krishna, the Black, the hidden sun god of the night, Tile, outlines, 145, is undoubtedly a very ancient mythological figure, but probably non-Aryan in origin. The nocturnal sun is a remarkable feature in Egypt and Akkad, and the dark color harmonizes with the complexion of those dusky races who were subdued by the lighter Semites and Aryans. Shem is probably connected with the Assyrian Samu, LL brownish, and Japhet, NP, with Ipua, white, Ipatu, white race. Vaidhi Reverend Professor Sayce, Assyrian Lectures, 145. 56 Existed a practical monotheism, to which he endeavored to err during his Regohuldia Mer Eneral Poargiers have looked back wistfully to church. It is easy to deny this great fact on the ground that we everywhere encounter numbers of figures of divinities, but a careful analysis of these shadows will resolve them into their kindred air, and the result will be the same, whether the process is applied in Vedic India, or in Iran, Scandinavia, Germany, Italy, or Greece. Nor does this principle obtain in Aryan regions only. Professor Sayce affirms that Babylonian and Akkadian religious mythology is essentially solar, that is, that we shall meet again with Mitra and Savitri and Yama and Agni, under other names indeed, but veritably the same personages in reality, and that Mchibus, who the Egyptian is well entitled to speak for Egypt, says doctrine revealed to the initiated the unity and incomprehensibility of God, while the multitude was abandoned to the cult of material symbols and these moderns have been anticipated by an ancient writer, who has left it on record that, Tc Aurak, Hav, Zuktc, feet n *tv. The theory of an archaic monotheism has been objected to on the ground that the instance of Plato and the other philosophical Greeks of the great ages shows that the monotheistic idea is the culmination and end, not the beginning of human thought. But the reply is obvious. Doubtless it required the intellectual might of a Plato to free the human mind from the meshes of a long-established polytheism, but there is no evidence that any such powers are needed for the original reception of the simple truth that there is one God, and none other but he/monotheism is simpler than polytheism, even as * the more the Babylonian mythology is examined, the more solar is its origin found to be thus, confirming the results and Semitic fields of research. Except n and arrived at he, the in the great Aryan deities we seem all to go back to the sun, transaction SPC Bib Arch Cell. 246, note. Are thus, it will be observed, left with a triad, namely, 1. Anu, Akkadian Anna, the high god, called Ziana, spirit of the heavens, Pater. 2. The sun god, Potentia. 3. He, the lord of wisdom and of the deep, called Hyana, Grkt records of the past, x6. Con, there the god he, mens. May be truth in the assertion that the esoteric religion of ancient Egypt centered in a doctrine of divine unity, manifested through the heterogeneous crowd of popular deities. Tyler, Primitive Culture, 2. 322, 57 1 is simpler than numbers. And the Platonic age affords us an illustration of that mysterious law of circle, which rules alike in nature and in thought. The heavenly bodies, circular in form, constantly describe their circling movements. The sun has his zodiac, and annus the year is but annulus, a ring. Eternity is fitly symbolized as a serpent, tail in mouth, and he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth has, from remote antiquity, been described as a circle whose center is everywhere, and its circumference nowhere. Nature abhors a straight line, as she is said to the earliest gospel of the wise abhor a vacuum, and nature is, poetry, philosophy, religion are essentially cyclic, and history repeats itself. Human t poran urdglaerd toiselps so yodisis instana won't thzayats ro awarfgilta tuntalali esion lus flop /ooikfsfegarufanat neadsnesudo.ra eshsara aldsen gatti and gaktio.fa est gifmertriho /aemt God we come, so to God we shall return. The poor, blind, stumbling world, at whose ignorance heaven winked, despised by chosen nations and peculiar people, still dreamed of its divine Ahura, still oaks of Dodona, Zeus, or raised chanted that archaic song heard amid the Zeus the was, Zeus's, piteous cry, Zeus will doubtless be, thou O great art our father, though Abraham be ignorant of us, and Israel acknowledge us not, thou, O Lord, art our father, our Redeemer. And in the latest days of the old world of heathenism, a pagan suckled in a creed outworn / could yet so distinguish substance amid shadow and reality from illusion, as, addressing the Ahura of heaven by a name known centuries earlier on the banks of the Indus, and grasping the grand principle of circle, to exclaim, thou whose power o'er moving worlds presides, whose voice created, and whose wisdom guides I from thee, great Zeus. We spring, to thee we tend, path, motive, guide, original, and end. Thus the philosophical Thucydides is satisfied if his history is judged useful by those who may desire an accurate knowledge of the past as a clue to that future which, in all human probability, must repeat or resemble the past. Professor Jeb, Greek F. Pausanias, X 12. Literature, 108. There is little or no trace of mythology in this song. As Professor Max Miller, Jeb well observes, lectures on there was the science a time when of language, too. They i.e. archaic 482, men had begun to speak of the natural powers as persons, and yet had not forgotten that they were really natural powers, and that the personal names were merely signs. Greek literature, 16. Vitae sup. Cs. 6, 21, 30. 58. The religion of Zoroaster considered in connection with archaic monotheism. Part I. The belief of Zoroaster. 1. The classics on the date of Zoroaster. 2. The name Magian. 3. Is Zoroaster an historical personage? His name. 4. Further classical references to Zoroaster. 5. Iranian sacred literature. 6. Mythology and religion. 7. Character and contents of the Buddhas. 8. Agriculture as a sacred duty. 9. The Zoroastrian theory of the twin spirits. 10. The protest against the devas and their worship. 11. History of the name Ahura, meaning of Ahura Mazda. 12. The devas and the deva cult. 13. The Soma orgies, and the bridge of the judge. 14. The Amishaspentas. 15. Mithra. 16. Mithra and the Buddhas. 17. Ahura Mazda as the creator. Part 2. The early Vedic belief. 18. Various modern theories respecting the nature of Vedic belief. 19. The Vedic divinities. 20. Analysis of the Vedic divinities. 21. Natural objects merely so regarded. 22. The forms of deity. 23. The Sunday 24. Yama. 25. The semi-solar light gods. 26. Varuna. 27. The Amishaspentas and the Adityas. 28. Martanda, the eighth Aditya. 29. Soma. 30. The physical Agni. 31. Agni, a combination and manifestation of the Vedic divinities. 32. Agni, the highest manifestation of divinity. 33. The essence of the Vedic divinities. 34. The law of circle. 59. Additional notes. Cit p8. Earliest notice of the Avesta. The earliest historical notice of the Avesta occurs at the close of the Median version of the Behistun, i.e. Bazistan, place of the god, inscription of Darius Histisps, Sir BC 516. This inscription, which is about 400 feet from the ground on the rock of Behistun, near the western frontier of Mada, Media, i.e. the country, and contains more than 1,000 lines of cuneiform writing, concludes, and Darius the Bang says, I have made also elsewhere a book in Aryan language, that formerly did not exist. And I have made the text of the divine law, Avesta, and a commentary of the divine law, and the prayer, and the translation. And it was written, and I sealed it. And then the ancient book was restored by me in all nations, and the nations followed it. Translated by Dr. Oppert in Records of the Past, 785, ETSEQ. Darius thus made a translation of the Avesta from the original Bactrian into the Persian of the Achaemenian period. p11. Dialect of the Buddhas. For an account of the linguistic peculiarities of the Buddhas, vide Professor C. de Harlez, Manuel de la Langue de Avesta, 105, ETSEQ p14. Non-reality. Expressions such as non-reality, non-entity, Rigveda, X 6:1, and the like, when occurring in archaic poetry, are used in a physical not in a metaphysical sense, and refer to what may be called primitive negative concepts, vide Dr. Hyde Clark, Researches in Prehistoric and Proto-Histon Comparative Philology, 21, ETSEQ. Amongst these are woman, i.e. not man, night, darkness, black, evil, not good, not, i.e. not, death, dream, shadow. The reappearance of heaven and earth after the darkness of night is regarded by the Vedic poets as a sort of recreation, a rescue from the realm of non-reality. p. 19. Ahura. The root as, which still lives in our is, existed in its abstract sense previous to the Aryan separation. The simplest derivation of as, to breathe, was as you, in Sanskrit, breath, and from it probably Asura, the oldest name for the living gods. Professor Miller, Lectures on the Origin and Growth of Religion, 191-2, Asu. 1 Mond. 2 p.romfa Durahachigreliefs g, Ivines din his lexicon, Anhu, Edra Fahu, and Asu, Edravi Mond. Matra, Chef. The Vedic s, except sometimes in a final syllable, appears in the language of the Avesta as h, e.g. Sonia, Hauma, Ahura, Ahura. 60 p. 20. The Deva and Ahura cults. M. Julius Jolly has recently remarked that the theory of a religious schism, which was supposed by Dr. Hogg to have brought about the separation of the Iranians from their Indian neighbors, has been entirely disposed of by M. Darmasteder's researches, and the revolution theory has been replaced by an evolution theory / Academy, February 1, 1879, p. 102. I greatly admire M. Darmstedter's very able work, Ormazd et Araman, but am unable to come to any such conclusion. Hogg has probably pushed his views on the matter too far, and 3 of the demons of the infernal council of Ahriman, i.e. Sorva, Andra, and Naon-Hathya, in all probability are not identical with the Vedic Shiva or Siva, Indra, and the Nasatyas or Asvins. But thus much granted, the conclusion by no means follows. The remarkable career of the words Deva and Ahura Darmstedter as an accident of language appears to be regarded by M. But to say that such and such a circumstance happened to occur is a restatement of the fact, not an explanation. Moreover, M. Darmasteder's theory depends upon the negation of an historical Zoroaster, a negative which is incapable of demonstration. Hang's views are in the main accepted by Bunsen, Max Dianker, Geschichte des Altertums, Lenormant, Manual of the Ancient History of the East, and Justy, Handbuch der Zendsprache, and are not denied by Professor Spiegel. p. 31. The name Avesta. Dr. Oppert observes that in the Behistun inscription, clause Li the Persian affords us the true origin of the word Avesta. It is Abast, the divine law, it is explained by the Assyrian Keenet, the laws. Records of the Past, 7107, Note 1. p. 36. The connection between Agni and Soma. As to the very intimate connection between Agni and Soma, who sometimes form a dual divinity, Agni Shamau, and represent 2 variant yet constantly intertwining phases of the visible external in its relations with the invisible external, Vidi M. Abel Bergenya, La Religion Vedic d'après les hymnes du Rig Veda, Tome Premier, 11-235. p. 47. The unanthropomorphic Sunday. As Martanda, the Vedic egg sun, is a smooth lump, destitute of any modifications of shape, so in the Egyptian funereal ritual, Cap. Sly, we read of the justified and triumphant Ioasarian, or follower of Osiris, who has been made like his lord, the sun god, that, he is in the solar eye and the solar egg. He is the day for race after race of men. He is the germ emanating from the firmament. He is the golden ape of the gods without hands or feet. He goes forth, the ape goes forth on his celestial path. 61. The chairman. I am sure our thanks are due to Mr. Brown for his very interesting paper. It is now open for anyone to offer remarks thereon. Reverend Dr. Aule. I have read Mr. Brown's paper as carefully as possible, and should be glad if he would instruct us as to some conclusions, towards which the particulars we have in his paper do not in my opinion lead us. The cry certainly is not piteous wherewith the Hebrew acknowledged God to be his father, father of Abraham, and here I cannot exactly understand why we should limit our recognition of the Godhead to Zeus. With regard to Zoroaster, I believe the main doctrine of that author was that of duality, that we of 2 gods, a god of darkness and a god of light. Have a book which contains a distinct historic reference to this idea. Have in that book the name of a person distinctly known in history, whose successor Darius, son of Hystaspes, waged war against Magism, which was associated with Zoroastrianism. Find there a doctrine against that duality, and I think we have materials there, which are distinctly historic, and the account of God which we have, is not imbued with the vague superstitions of heathenism, but it is distinctly stated at the very beginning of the Bible and is historically continued all through as revealed monotheism as proved by all prophecy, prophecy fulfilled, associated and linked in with the general history of the whole world. It does appear to me, whilst anxious to second the vote of thanks to Mr. Brown for the great pains he has taken with this paper, that we should be anxious inquirers into revealed truth. I think if we were to take some firm basis in regard to this great subject of monotheism whereon to rest our researches, we should obtain some place on which to rest our inquiry. I think, however, that Mr. Brown's paper has tended to furnish us with a very striking illustration of an undoubted proof, that none, by searching, can find out God, and that those historians who have searched have most singularly failed, and have deprived us of any idea that the notion of Professor Muller, which is adopted very warmly by Mr. Brown, will ever be realized. The words are these, and I think more distinctly than in any other part of the paper, they express the conclusions arrived at the foot of page 33, however, ere examining the principal Vedic concepts, we may remember with comfort a statement of Professor Muller, which is not based upon any particular passage or passages, but upon a wide and careful investigation of the subject, a statement which has my warmest assent. Like an old precious metal, the ancient religion, after the rust of ages has been removed, will come out in all its purity and brightness, and the image which it discloses will be the image of the Father of all the nations upon earth. Now, it does seem ungrateful, very ungrateful, to forget that divine revelation and the coming of Christ into the world have not thrown the rust of ages upon the ancient truth, but have rather removed the rust of ages and brought life and immortality to light, and that whatever great change in the world has taken place in religion since the time of Zoroaster, must be attributed to that divine interpretation which we find recorded in the Bible. Therefore, I should be glad if we could be conducted by Mr. Brown to a 62 more definite conclusion than that with which he has favored us, and I might trust that he will accept strictures in the spirit of courtesy and kindness in which I have intended to give them. Mr. N. Moore Jones. I am sorry that I have not been able thoroughly to study the paper, and would ask the author whether he could favor us with his idea as to when Zoroaster really lived. The last speaker has referred to Revelation. Before he spoke, I had in my mind the fact that there is a book called Job, which contains a clear statement as to the Great One God, and therefore I felt anxious to know whether Job was first or Zoroaster. Mr. Brown. On page 8 I give as a conclusion that as to date, the composition of the Gathas may be fairly placed at some time prior to BC 1200, and Zoroaster may be put from 1500 BC to 1200 BC. Mr. Jones. There seems at any rate to be a vagueness about the date, whereas if we take Job, as a book of itself, it has a clear and definite idea given in it of the Creator 2300 BC, say 1000 years before Zoroaster. And it has this advantage, that it contains a series of historical incidents. I think it is very important that in searching amongst the ancients for the philosophy of the ancients, we should not forget the vital knowledge we have through the scriptures. Have the Jewish scriptures and the Christian scriptures, and they both certainly teach us that there is one God, that he is the one God, the Creator, the Preserver, and Governor, not only of all the countries of this world, but of the universe. I must say it struck me that in the history we call our scriptures, we have a much clearer narrative there of the workings of the deity in nature than we have in Zoroaster, or in any other teacher. I think that the principles which have guided the Institute ought to be kept clearly before our minds. Mr. J. E. Howard, F.E.S. I should like to make a few observations to the age of Zoroaster and his religion. I do not wish to put aside the very well-intentioned observations of those who have preceded me, but I think there is another aspect of the question, to which they have not perhaps given as much attention as they might have done. I refer to the very interesting abstract which this paper contains of the doctrines of Zoroaster. and suggest that it becomes the duty of our missionaries and those who are in contact with the Parsis in India, to make themselves acquainted with the religion which they have there to combat, otherwise they might be placed under a great disadvantage. Perhaps it may be known to some here, that a great controversy took place on the occasion of one of the Parsis being converted to the Christian faith, when the Parsis took up many popular ideas, and showed that theirs verged very much on the Zoroastrian religion. For instance, that popular hymn, well, I cannot call it that, but that translation of an old Coman verse, vital spark of heavenly flame. Quit, this mortal frame. That is entirely, though unintentionally, Parsiism. This controversy shows that, at all events, the Christians who come in contact with these doctrines 63 ought to know very well what they are about. I trust that the writer of this paper has no intention to depreciate Christianity by those expressions which have been noticed by previous speakers. The great idea which he endeavors to bring out, that monotheism is really at the bottom of this religion, is no doubt correct. The question as to the age of Zoroaster is a very difficult one, and I confess that I cannot get at the bottom of it. I have studied the very elaborate examination, by Dr. Quolson, of St. Petersburg, of Eastern authorities respecting this matter, and he seems to prove that the change in the religion of Persia is from Sabaism to the religion of Zoroaster. Early idolatry began, according to the Eastern authorities, with Tamnias. Dr. Quolson says, LP 347, that we know almost nothing of the religion of the old Persians, and that it would not be correct to identify that which prevailed in the northern provinces with the peculiar Persian religion. In Bactria and Media the religion of the reformer Zoroaster was prevailing long before Cyrus, but the old Persians were probably no adherents of the religion of Zoroaster, but, as the geographer Dimsky asserts, Worstbians. In early days men worshipped God and the angels whom he sent, Vol. 2 pages 606, 459, 206, but Tammuz endeavored to lead his sovereign into idolatry, to worship the heavenly host, and to consider the stars, and particularly the planets, as the gods and directors of mankind who governed everything that took place on earth. The result of this was that, according to the tradition, Tammuz was put to death by his sovereign, and his bones were ground in a mill, and scattered to the winds. He was put to death in a very cruel way, and in consequence of his death all the gods came together at a temple in Babylon, and spent the whole night in weeping and bewailing the death of this prophet, and then betook themselves to their respective homes all over the world. This gave occasion to the ceremony of weeping for Tammuz, which is alluded to in our prophets. They kept up that festival, with this peculiarity about it, that the women were not allowed during its course to have anything that was ground in a mill, because the bones of Tammuz had been ground in a mill. Now, this was a world-old institution. According to Mr. Boscawen, the god Tammuz is evidently the Dumzi, the son of life, to seek whom Ishtar descends into Hades. The deification of Tammuz, and the complication with, perhaps, a solar myth, seems engrafted on the original story. More light will probably be thrown on the obscurities of the subject. In the meantime, the tradition strongly indicates that, before the introduction of idolatry, a purer religion prevailed. The attempt to restore this is perhaps to be attributed to Zoroaster. Is it not probable that he is identical with Buddhism? Confounded with Buddha, of whom Masudi relates that he came from India, traveled through Sind, Sejistan, and Zabulistan, and again to Kerman, until at last he came to Persia, everywhere giving himself out as a prophet, and maintaining that he was one sent from God, and a mediator between him and his creatures. This took place, according to some, in the reign of the Persian king Tammuz, according to others, in the time of the king Jemshid. Quolson, Vol. I-64 p. 208. I hope that the subject will be again taken up by some member of the Institute. Mr. McDonnell. I am much pleased to hear the remarks of the last speaker. I think that two of the previous speakers have not done sufficient justice to this remarkable and interesting paper, one that evidently contains the result of very great information and research, a paper that ought not to be treated in a light manner. It is full of other persons' thoughts, and containing authorities that are not within the reach of most people. It gives extracts from literature of a most interesting character, and quotes novel and beautiful poetry. Now, it seems to me that the paper is not open to the observations made by the first speaker. So far as I can gather from the statements that were made, there was no such feeling as he referred to running through the paper at all. On the contrary, frequent allusions were made in the paper by which we were reminded of the superiority of the scriptures. So far as I understand the paper, it goes to show that, even in early times, there was a groping after some form of monotheism. This of itself would be a most valuable result. Having said so much in praise of the paper, may I be permitted to put one or two questions to the lecturer? I was curious to see what opinion the lecturer had arrived at as to the precise age at which Zoroaster lived. At page 2 he states that Endokos and Aristotle placed Zoroaster 6,000 years before the time of Plato, and Hermippos placed the age of Zoroaster 5,000 years before the Trojan War, while another authority, Masudi, gives another date, namely BC 600. Mr. Brown himself arrived at a fourth opinion, which was somewhat different. With respect to the ground upon which he arrived at that opinion, or, in fact, the grounds upon which he has arrived at any of his opinions, I think there is room for further enlightenment. It is one thing to know when Zoroaster lived, and it is another, almost as important, to know whether he lived at all, and I think this is fairly open to doubt. At page 3 we have the opinion of Sir H. Collinson, to the effect that Zoroaster was the personification of the old Horizionim of the Scythic race. At the same page we have the opinion of a learned foreigner, M. Darmstedter, who regards Zoroaster as one of the many bright powers of heaven who fight in an almost endless strife against the powers of darkness and evil. And at page 4 we have the statement of Mr. Brown himself that the question whether Zoroaster lived or not is of comparatively little importance. Then, further on, it is said that Zoroaster might be regarded as the founder of a religion and as one who was essentially a reformer, and, if so, I suppose that at some time or other he lived. I should like to know from Mr. Brown whether there are any solid grounds for believing that Zoroaster was an historical personage, or whether Zoroaster is merely the name in which was included a vast number of religious reformers and teachers, perhaps of different ages. There is another remark I should like to make. I would venture to ask whether the method of inquiry pursued by the lecturer in the latter portion of the paper, is a method of inquiry that is likely to result in really sound conclusions. It seemed to me that the mode of reasoning which he followed was one which 65 might lead to false conclusions. He took up a divinity named Agni, and endeavored to find the various forms under which that divinity was expressed and discovered. He found a constant reference to fire, and then grouping the various descriptions together, he arrived at the conclusion that Agni was the god of fire. Now I think this is a dangerous way of reasoning. Suppose that 5,000 years hence some person with the same means of reasoning with respect to our society, as Mr. Brown has with respect to ancient Persia, should get information with respect to ghosts that have been seen in the 19th century, and putting all together should ask himself what there was in common? Mr. Brown has found that by common consent Agni in all respects was fire. What would a person considering the question of ghosts 5,000 years hence find? He would observe that they were always seen robed in white, and probably conclude that the idea of a ghost in the 19th century, by common consent, was inseparably connected with white calico. Laughter. Such a course of reasoning strikes me as rather dangerous, and I would suggest that Mr. Brown should state what portion of his paper he really considers conjecture, and what portion he considers as sound and based upon undoubted evidence. I think that there are two elements in the paper we have heard tonight, and that the valuable element which I have referred to is of no small extent. Here. Mr. D. Howard. I think the subject of the paper well worthy of careful consideration, for it involves the whole question of early religions. There is a certain school of thought which tells us with all the boldness which modern scientists alone can command, especially when they are not quite sure of their subject, that man is an improving subject, and that man's religion in the beginning was not monotheism. It does seem to me that the more we study the early histories of religious thought, the more profoundly we are convinced that there is no truth whatever in this conception. I should not venture to enter into the question as to how far Zoroaster was responsible for the dualism in which his followers indulged, but still it is most interesting to find that at that early age you have a reformer appealing not to progress, but to antiquity. He does not appeal to the growing intellect of man, but he appeals to antiquity. He looks back to monotheism, not forward, and I say that from this point of view we cannot too carefully consider this ancient record. It is still more interesting to find the same monotheistic idea running through the religious books even of those he opposed. It is, indeed, true that there is a school of thought which goes to those books to find the origin of the Old Testament revelation. May study Plato to see what the lights of the Greek mind were, and we may study St. Paul without thinking that St. Paul borrowed from Plato, and it seems to me that we may well study the longings of the human mind for a purer religion, that purer religion being monotheism, and we shall find that in the past and better ages the religion of our fathers was monotheism. Anyone coming fresh to the confused thoughts and to the muddled ideas of the books we have been considering, will all the more value the ideas contained in the book of Job, and it is interesting to find in that book those allusions to kissing the hand to the sun, which was the very P66 beginning of that nature worship which has degenerated into that horrible and barbarous system which we now see practiced in India. Then, again, it is interesting to watch those attempts at reformation that are not founded upon revealed religion, but on human intellect. Another thing which renders the Zendavesta and Persian thought a matter of interest, is the amazing influence the Persian thought had on early Christian thought and on the speculations of the Gnostics. Eve. J. James. I should be glad to say a word or two in the same direction that has been pursued by the last two speakers, namely, that I do not see in the paper the slightest tendency to disparage the revelation we have in the Bible. On the contrary, every reference to the Christian faith in this paper is a loyal and warm tribute to the doctrines of the gospel. I wish also to say that I look upon the paper as a very valuable contribution to the true philosophy of religion. As has been observed by the last speaker, it seems to be a valuable contribution to the argument, that the degraded forms of religion which are found in all the heathen nations of the earth are not aboriginal, but descendants from an original higher height, and that that higher height is the highest height of monotheism. One passage has been referred to as an objectionable one, but which I must say, in opinion, is a very valuable thought. It is Max Muller who says, like an old precious metal, the ancient religion, after the rust of ages has been removed, will come out in all its purity and brightness, and the image which it discloses will be the image of the Father of all the nations upon earth. True, the gospel supplies us with religion free from rust, but what we want is to see that that rust which has grown upon the earlier and purer forms of pagan faiths is capable of being rubbed away, and that underneath we shall find tokens if not proofs of an aboriginal religion, which is a faith in the one God. I wish to join in the thanks to the author of the paper for his valuable contribution to this important argument. I should like to know, with reference to the passage in Greek given in the paper, where the words are taken from. The words are these: Hypus kaverj, h/i/jrtjp, kutrapig, apreg, /7, 09 hpavtoqtfk \vtog, tldv, zsuqre, koihpj, aprt/u, rdekotpig atroxai/ fig 605 ptiv. Mr. Brown. I believe the passage is quoted in Athenaeus and I think it has been attributed to Hernesian Acts. Mr. J. Ferguson, Ceylon. 17 years residence in the East has led me to think that one important point in the preparation for missionary work is a knowledge of the religious beliefs of the people among whom Christianity is to be taught, and a sympathy, so far as possible, with precepts and doctrines not distinctly evil in their tendency. I believe our most successful missionaries in the East have been those who have not only learned the language of the people amongst whom they have labored, but who have been enabled to translate their sacred and other notable books, and thus to obtain the sympathies of the enlightened among the natives. I 67 think that this paper will be particularly valuable to Christian teachers going to work in northern and western India and Persia, and I hope that it may pass through the hands of our more enlightened fellow subjects in India. I think the value of such papers as this is very great to missionaries going to the East, who ought to get an idea of the religions they are about to controvert. We Captain F. Petrie. All know that it is unfortunately too common a thing to find people in these days going into such inquiries as Mr. Brown has, with a very small portion of the abilities that he has brought to the task. Such inquirers are unhappily only too eager to publish to the world the results of their investigations, which being imperfect, and generally very incorrect, naturally give false impressions. It is amongst the writings of such inquirers that the advocates of infidelity find weapons forged for their use. I think we may congratulate ourselves that the subject of inquiry in the present paper has been taken up by Mr. Brown, for few in England have had the training to enable them to take up the subject and investigate it with understanding as he has done. Mr. Brown. I have to thank the meeting for the attention they have given to my paper, and, at the same time, to say a few words on one or two points which seem to require a reply. Dr. Rule has said that the Hebrew cry was not piteous. I did not say that it was, but that the words were spoken in that piteous way in which enlightened man would speak. He doubted whether the conception of Zoroaster was monotheism, and remarked that it was mere duality, but he did not allude to the opinions of the latest investigators on this point, and he quoted the scripture, "Canst thou by searching find out God?" One I would answer by another passage of scripture, "You shall find me if you seek me with your whole heart." Mr. Jones followed, and seemed to hope that I had not intended to degrade Christianity. Certainly not. I can yield to no man present in my respect for Christianity and the Holy Scriptures. The object of this paper is their defense, and I should have thought it almost unnecessary to point it out. I am glad to find that other speakers have relieved me from the charge. This paper was not written merely for persons who accept Holy Scripture. It is a paper intended for the whole world. The object of this society is to set forth the truth of religion, and in doing so it must start from a common basis. It is no good appealing to people on grounds which your opponents disavow. You must say, "I will look at the question from your own point of view." That is the basis of this paper, and that is why extracts from the scriptures are not more introduced, as the second speaker appeared to wish. The object is to show that the statements of the Bible are supported by history. We believe the Bible to be inspired, but, at the same time, we are not on that account to neglect the teachings of nature. Should make a threefold cord that cannot be easily broken. This paper, I trust, may be examined by people who have not a belief in Holy Scripture. If it only has the effect of bringing them to a more careful study of these questions, it will lead towards the truth. Mr. Howard has alluded to Tiamat as a prophet. 68 I think that he will find that Tammuz is the Assyrian Dumtiza, and that the women who wept for him wept for the setting sun. One gentleman has alluded to the great differences of opinion which exist as to the age of Zoroaster. I have given all the different opinions as to the age of Zoroaster, not because I follow them, but because I wish to give something like literary completeness to my paper. The highest authorities, who have devoted many years to this subject, place him at BC 1400 or 1300, and they adduce this from the progressive state of the language. That is the chief means of fixing his date. As to the evidence, that is also comparative. You cannot call direct evidence of the original fact whether there was such a man or not, but I will read you a letter which I have received from Professor Sayce, of Oxford. I am altogether of your way of thinking in regard to the historical personality of the Iranian prophet. The character of Zoroastrianism seems to me to postulate an individual founder, just as much as Christianity, Mohammedanism, or Buddhism. One gentleman has objected to my analysis of the Vedic Agni, and asked we how it was that he was fire? Have the word ignis, and we know that ignis means fire. As to mythology and religion, my meaning is simply this, that mythology is the result of man's childlike and simple considerations of the world around us. If I may quote from a passage in a note on page 57 of the essay, I would say, Professor Jebwell observes, there was a time when they, i.e. archaic men, had begun to speak of the natural powers as persons, and yet had not forgotten that they were really natural powers, and that the personal names that, I take it, was the simple primitive origin of mythology, and that is what I mean by calling it the younger sister of religion. The great point which this paper aims at is, to show that mankind began well. That is our fundamental doctrine as Christians. However the book of Genesis may be understood, it certainly lays down most precisely that man began well. If that position can ever be turned, and it can be shown that man began badly, or as a being evolved out of some lower form of life, with no knowledge of God or of religion at all, but that he was a creature moving about in a world half realized, then the position of Christianity would be turned, but I am as certain of the fact as that I am here, that this can never be shown, and that the position of Christianity is impregnable. It is my wish to set forth that as far as we can extend our researches into these early records side by side with the Bible, we find them in perfect harmony with the biblical statements. I am exceedingly obliged to the meeting for the manner in which they have listened to my paper, and especially to Mr. James for his kindly remarks. The meeting was then adjourned. Klj Victoria or, Ljiladalaropi, Kalj Tate 0 Fr Tat 7, Adelphi Terrace, Strand, London, WC correspondence, including applications from intending members or associates, and c. to be addressed to the Secretary. For subscriptions see page 2. Objects. His society has been founded for the purpose of promoting the following objects, which will be admitted by all to be of high importance both to religion and science. First, to investigate fully and impartially the most important questions of philosophy and science, but more especially those that bear upon the great truths revealed in Holy Scripture, with the view of reconciling any apparent discrepancies between Christianity and science. Second, to associate men of science and authors who have already been engaged in such investigations, and all others who may be interested in them, in order to strengthen their efforts by association, and by bringing together the results of such labors, after full discussion, in the printed transactions of an institution, to give greater force and influence to proofs and arguments which might be little known, or even disregarded, if put forward merely by individuals. For the special advantages secured to country and colonial members and associates in the Journal of Transactions see below. Third, to consider the mutual bearings of the various scientific conclusions arrived at in the several distinct branches into which science is now divided, in order to get rid of contradictions and conflicting hypotheses, and thus promote the real advancement of true science, and to examine and discuss all supposed scientific results with reference to final causes, and the more comprehensive and fundamental principles of philosophy proper, based upon faith in the existence of one eternal God, who in His wisdom created all things very good. Fourth, to publish papers read before the Society in furtherance of the above objects, along with full reports of the discussions thereon, in the form of a journal, or as the transactions of the Institute. Fifth, when subjects have been fully discussed, to make the results known by means of lectures of a more popular kind, and to publish such lectures. Sixth, to publish English translations of important foreign works of real scientific and philosophical value, especially those bearing upon the relation between the Scriptures and science, and to co-operate with other philosophical societies at home and abroad, which are now or may hereafter be formed, in the interest of scriptural truth and of real science, and generally in furtherance of the objects of this society. Seventh, to found a library and reading rooms for the use of the members of the Institute, combining the principal advantages of a literary club. The Society now consists of 750 subscribing members, nearly two-thirds of who are country and foreign members, including His Grace the Archbishop of Canterbury and other prelates and leading ministers of religion, professors of English and foreign universities, literary and scientific men in general, and others favorable to the objects. The present average annual increase is upwards of 100. The Victoria Institute. President. The Right Honourable the Earl of Shaftesbury, KG Vice Presidents. The Right Honourable the Earl of Harrowby, KG Philip Henry Goss, ESQ, FRSCB Radcliffe, ESQ, MD, and C. Reverend Robinson Thornton, DDW Forsyth, ESQ, QC, Doctor of Laws, MP Reverend Principal T.P. Boltby, LLD Honorary Correspondence. Professor G.G. Stokes, FRS, Cam. Principal J.W. Dawson, Doctor of Laws, FRS Hormizd Rassam, ESQ Professor K.A. Wirtz, FRS, President of the Association of France for the Advancement of Science. Professor Joachim Barand, Prague, Professor Zero. Here, Zurich. Honorary Treasurer. William Noel West, ESQ Honorable C. An Editor of Journal. Captain F. W. H. Petrie, FGS, F.R.S.L., and C. Robert Baxter, ESQ, Trustee. J. A. Eraser, ESQ, MD, IGH Vice Admiral E. G. Fishborn, CBH Cadman Jones, ESQ, Barrister at Law. R. N. Fowler, ESQ, Trustee. Reverend W. Arthur, D.D. William H. Ince, ESQ, F.L.S., FRMSCR Bree, ESQ, MD, FZS, and O. Alex. M. Arthur, ESQ. MPJ John Elliott Howard, ESQ, FRSEJ Mooreshead, ESQ, HMC.S comma number O. FBRJ Reverend G.W. Weldon, M.A., B.M. Alfred V. Newton, ESQC or S. Reverend Principal J. Angus, M.A., D.D.S.D. Waddy, ESQ, QC, MPO J. Bateman, ESQ, FRS, FLS William Vanner, ESQ, FRMS. I. The Master of the Charterhouse. Alfred J. Woodhouse, ESQ, FRMSD Howard, ESQ, FCS Reverend J. H. Rigg, D.D., President Wes. CONF Professor H. A. Nicholson, M.D.F.R.S.E. Reverend Prebendary Rowe, M.A.L.F.B. Hawkins, M.D., FRS membership and subscriptions. Intending members and associates are requested to apply to the Secretary. The annual subscription for members is 2 guineas, with 1 guinea entrance fee, see privileges. The annual subscription for associates is 1 guinea, without entrance fee. In lieu of annual subscription, the payment of 20 guineas, without entrance fee, will constitute a life member, or 10 guineas a life associate. The payment of a donation of not less than 60 guineas qualifies for the office of vice patron, with all the privileges of a life member or life associate. It is to be understood, that only such as are professedly Christians are entitled to become members. Mes S% rs.al basnisbazmk ript 1 ionisler meal play eosptali to the SW, or Victoria Institutes may be remitted to W credit at N West, ESQ, the Treasurer, at the Institute's office. Privileges. Members on election, are presented with any volume of the first or second series of the Journal of the Transactions, and are entitled to a copy of the journal, either in the quarterly parts, or the annual, bound, volume, for the years during which they may subscribe, and to a copy of any other documents or books which may be published under the auspices of the Society in furtherance of Object 6, and, on application, to a copy of every paper published in the People's Edition, to the use of the library. Books can be sent to the country, reading and writing rooms, affording many of the conveniences of a club, and to introduce 2 visitors at each meeting. The council are chosen from among the members, who alone are eligible to vote by ballot in determining any question at a general meeting. Members are further privileged to obtain any volumes, other than that chosen, of the transactions issued prior to their joining the Institute at half price, half a guinea each, or any quarterly parts for past years at half a crown each. The library, reading, and writing rooms are open, for the use of the members only, from 10 till 5, Saturdays till 2. The Institute exchanges transactions with the Royal Society, and many other leading English and foreign scientific bodies, whose transactions are therefore added to the library. Associates are entitled, to the journal, in quarterly parts or in the annual volume, for the years during which they may subscribe, to obtain the earlier volumes or parts at a reduced price, and to introduce one visitor at each meeting. Members and associates have the right to be present at all meetings of the society. The meetings, of which due notice is given, are held at 7, Adelphi Terrace, at 8 o'clock on the evenings of the first and third Mondays of the winter, spring, and summer months. Proof copies of the papers to be read can be had by those desirous of placing their opinions thereon before the members. When unable to attend, they can do this in writing. Cease paragraph on page 3. The Victoria Institute. The journal is arranged so as to secure its special usefulness to country and foreign members and associates, who form 2/3 of the Institute. The journal contains the papers read at the meetings, and the discussions thereon. Before they are published in the journal, the papers themselves, and the discussions, are revised and corrected by their authors, and miscomments and supplementary remarks are added, which have been sent in by those home and foreign members to whom, as being specially qualified to pronounce an opinion upon the respective subjects, proof copies of the papers have been submitted for consideration. These arrangements, which cannot but add to the value of the journal, are carried out with a view to the advantage of all, especially country and foreign members, who thus find in the journal much valuable matter, in addition to that which had come before those actually present at the meetings. The Journal of the Transactions. Since the inauguration of the Society, on the 24th of May, 1866, the following papers have been read. The quarterly parts of the journal are indicated by the numbers prefixed. The volumes are sold at 1 guinea to non-members, half a guinea to members and associates. First Series, Vols 1-6. Vol. IA1. Sketch of the existing relations between Scripture and Science. By the late George Warrington, ESQ, FCS2. On the difference in scope between Scripture and Science. By the late C. Mountford Burnett, ESQ, MD, Vice President VI. On comparative philology. By the Reverend Robinson Thornton, DD, Vice President VI. On the various theories of man's past and present condition. By the late James Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI3. On the language of gesticulation and origin of speech. By Professor J.R. Young. On miracles, their compatibility with philosophical principles. By the Reverend W. W. English, M.A. Thoughts on Miracles. By the late E. B. Penny, ESQ on the general character of geological formations. By the late E. Hopkins, ESQ, CE4. On the past and present relations of geological science to the sacred scriptures. By the Reverend Professor John Kirk. On the lessons taught us BV Geology in relation to God. Reverend J. Brodie, M.A. On the mutual helpfulness of theology and natural science. By Dr. Gladstone, F.R.S. On falling stars and meteorites. By the late Reverend W. Mitchell, M.A., Vice President VI, the above papers, with the discussions thereon, and with Science Antia Scientiarum, being some account of the origin and objects of the Victoria Institute, with the reports of the provisional proceedings, and the inaugural address by the late Reverend Walter Mitchell, M.A., Vice President, form Volume I of the Journal. Vol. IL5. On the terrestrial changes and probable ages of the continents, founded upon astronomical data and geological facts. By the late Evan Hopkins, ESQ, CE, FGS. On the credibility of Darwinism. By the late George Warrington, ESQ, FCS. On the credibility of Darwinism. By the late James Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI. On utilitarianism. By the late James Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI. On the logic of skepticism. By the Reverend Robinson Thornton, D.D., VP Annual Address, on the Institute's work. By the late James Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI 7. On the relations of metaphysical and physical science to the Christian doctrine of prayer. By the Reverend Professor John Kirk. On geological chronology, and the cogency of the arguments by which some scientific doctrines are supported. LU reply to Professor Huxley's address delivered at Zion College on November 21, 1867. By the late J. Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI, 1867-68. On the GT.M trickle isomorphism of crystals, and the derivation of all other forms from those of the cubical system. 6 plates. By the late Reverend W. Mitchell, M.A., VP the Victoria Institute. Vol. 39. On the Antiquity of Civilization. By the Right Reverend Bishop Titcomb, D.D. On Life, with some observations on its origin. By J. H. Wheatley, ESQ, Ph.D. On the unphilosophical character of some objections to the divine inspiration of Scripture. By the late Reverend Walter Mitchell, M.A., Vice President VI. On comparative psychology. By E. J. Mooreshead, ESQ, Honorable 4. Secretary VI 10. On theology as a science. By the Reverend Ada L. A. Mayer, M.A. On the immediate derivation of science from the great first cause. By R. Laming, F.S.Q. On some of the philosophical principles contained in Mr. Buckle's History of Civilization, in reference to the laws of the moral and religious developments of man. By the Reverend Prebendary C. A. Rowe, M.A. On the nature of human language, the necessities of scientific phraseology, and the application of the principles of both to the interpretation of Holy Scripture. By the Reverend J. Bailey, D.D. 11. On the common origin of the American races with those of the Old World. By the Right Reverend Bishop Titcomb, D.D. On the simplification of first principles in physical science. By C. Brooke, ESQ, FRS, and C. On the biblical cosmogony scientifically considered. By late G. Warrington, ESQ, FCS. On ethical philosophy. By the Reverend W. W. English, M.A. 12. On some uses of sacred primeval history. By the late D. McCausland, ESQ, QC, LLD. On the relation of reason to philosophy, theology, and revelation. By the Reverend Prebendary C. A. Rowe, M.A. Vol. 413. Analysis of human responsibility. By the Reverend Prebendary Irons, D.D., and Part 16. On the doctrine of creation according to Darwin, Agassiz, and Moses. By Professor K.L.R.K. 14. On the Noachian deluge. By the Reverend M. Davison. On life its origin. By J. H. Wheatley, ESQ, Ph.D. On man's place in creation. By the late Professor MacDonald, M.D. 15. On more than one universal deluge recorded in Scripture. By Reverend H. Model, M.A. On certain analogies between the methods of deity in nature and revelation. By the Reverend G. Henslow, M.A., FLS. On the respective provinces of the observer and the reasoner in scientific investigation. By the Reverend Edward Garbutt, M.A. On the credulity of skepticism. By the Reverend R. Thornton, D.D., VP 16. On current physical astronomy. By the late J. Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI Analysis of Human Responsibility. By Reverend Preb. Irons, D.D., see Part 13. Concluded. Vol. V. 17. On the Origin of the Negro. By the Right Reverend Bishop Titcomb, D.D. On the Testimony of Philosophy to Christianity as a Moral and Spiritual Revelation. By the Reverend Prebendary C. A. Rowe, M.A. 18. 19 tescmp mulnanasnug demirn si wardaligi yukt pasarn blogoio alzenfees estravatio et femiendokshan jipvos, it no. Hern coect bluthioidifatnp. Eroisadtulb. Abalm tiims tgio. Afratan. Libupsfire. Retevhid. Esibdo. J. Ryan. Eevt. Mheestxrkai. NV. n.tfhh.pugradner.onspdits.zoeskno-rvp, klrkvi, on True Anthropology. By W. Hitchman, ESQ, MDV 20. On Comparative Psychology. Second paper. By E. J. Mooreshead, ESQ, Honorable the High Numbers in the Pentateuch. By P. H. Goss, ESQ, F.R.S., 4. P. Secretary VI Israel in Egypt. By the Reverend H. Moule, M.A. Vol. 621. On Civilization, Moral, and Material. Also in reply to Sir John Lubbock on Primitive Man. By the late J. Reddy, ESQ, Honorable Secretary VI, 1869-70. On Dr. Newman's Essay in Aid of a Grammar of Assent. By the Reverend Preb. Rowe, M.A. 22. On the Evidence of the Egyptian Monuments to the Sojourn of Israel in Egypt. By the Reverend B. W. Saville, M.A. On the Moabite Stone, by Captain F. Petrie, Honorable Secretary on Phyllotaxis, or, the Arrangement of Leaves in Accordance with Mathematical Laws. By the Reverend G. Henslow, M.A., F.L.S. On Prehistoric Monotheism, Considered in Relation to Man as an Aboriginal Savage. By the Right Reverend Bishop Titcomb, D.D., 1871-72. 23 On Biblical Pneumatology and Psychogogy. By the Reverend W. W. English, M.A. On Some Scriptural Aspects of Man's Tripartite Nature. By the Reverend C. Graham. 24 On Ethnic Testimonies to the Darwinian Theory. The Pentateuch. By the Right Reverend Bishop by the Reverend Prebendary Irons. D.D. Titcomb, D.D. Serpent Myths of Ancient Egypt. By W. R. Cooper, ESQ, late Secretary SOC Biblical Archaeology, 129 illustrations. The Victoria Institute. Second Series, Vols, 7-12. Vol. 725. On Natural Theology, Considered with Respect to Modern Philosophy. By the Reverend G. Henslow, M.A., F.L.S. On Fatalism. Contributed by the Reverend J. Bobbins, D.D. 26. On Darwinism tested by recent researches in language. E.Y.F. Bateman, ESQ, M.D., and C. On Force and Professor Its Manifestations. By Tyndall T.S. Fragments the Reverend J. of Science M. Can, D.D. for Unscientific People. By the Reverend Prebendary Irons. D.D. On the Origin of the Moral Sense. By the Reverend Professor Kirk. On Force and Energy. By Charles Brooke, ESQ, M.A., F.R.S., VP 27. On Darwinism and its Effects upon Religious Thought. By C. R. Bree, ESQ, M.D., and C. Remarks on some of the current principles of historic criticism. By Reverend Preb. Rowe, M.A. On Scientific Facts and Christian Evidence. By J. Elliott Howard, ESQ, F.R.S.F.L.S. 28. On the Law of Creation Unity of Plan, Variety of Form. By Reverend G. W. Weldon, M.A. Some remarks on the present aspect of inquiries as to the introduction of genera and species in geological time. By Principal J. W. Dawson, Doctor of Laws, F.R.S. Vol. 829. The Paleolithic Age Examined. By N. Whitley, ESQ, Annual Address. On the Moral and Social Anarchy of Modern Unbelief. By the Reverend Principal T. P. Boltby, Doctor of Laws, Vice President. 30 On the Identity of Reason in Science and Religion. Reverend R. Mitchell. On Buddhism. By the Right Reverend Bishop Piers C. Claughton, D.D., and C., with communications from Professors Chandler and Brewer. On the Contrast Between Crystallization and Life. By John Elliott Howard, ESQ, FRS 31. On the Brixham Cavern and its Testimony to the Antiquity of Man Examined. By N. Whitley, ESQ, Secretary Royal INST of Cornwall. On the Rules of Evidence as Applicable to the Credibility of History. By W. Forsyth, Esq, QC, Doctor of Laws, MP, Vice President. On the Principles of Modern Pantheistic and Atheistic Philosophy as expressed in the last work of Strauss, Mill, and C. By the Reverend Prebendary C. A. Rowe, M.A. paper on the 32. On S. Apri Ispti or Perkofter Sazdwardikonuslenst, FRS customs in connection with sun and serpent worship. J. S. Fenn, Esq, Doctor of Laws, FSA, with illustrations. 1872-73, Vol. X 33. On the Varying Tactics of Skepticism. Annual Address. By the Reverend Robinson Thornton, D.D., Vice President. OU The Harmony Between the Chronology of Egypt and the Bible. By the Reverend B. W. Saville, M.A. 31. On the Ethical Condition of the Early Scandinavian Peoples. On Magnitudes in Creation and Their Bearings on Biblical by E. W. Goss, Esq Interpretation. By the Right Reverend Bishop Titcomb, D.D. paper on the same, by Professor Shallis, FRS, with communications from the Astronomer Royal's Department, the Radcliffe IE Observer and Professor Pritchard, FRS. On Biblical Interpretation in Connection with Science. By the Reverend A. I. McCall, M.A., King's College, with a communication by Principal J. W. Dawson, on the Final Cause as Principle of Cognition and Principle in Nature. Doctor of Laws, FRS. By Professor G. S. Morris, of Michigan University, U.S. 35. On the bearing of certain paleontological facts upon the Darwinian theory of the origin of species, and of evolution in general. By Professor H. A. Nicholson. M.D. Sc. FGS, and C. On the Early Dawn of Civilization, Considered in the Light of Scripture. By J. E. Howard, Esq, FRS. On the Indestructibility of Force. By the Reverend Professor B. L. RKS, M.A. 36. On Mr. Mill's Essays on Theism. By Reverend Preb. W. J. Irons, D.D. The Victoria Institute. Vol. X 37. On the Chronology of Recent Geology. By S. R. Pattison, Esq, FGS. On the Nature and Character of Evidence for Scientific Purposes. By the Reverend J. M. Can, D.D. The Relation of the Scripture Account of the Deluge to Physical Science. By Professor Shallis, M.A., FRS, FRAS 38. An Examination of the Belfast Address from a Scientific Point of View. By J. E. Howard, Esq, FRS/Annual Address, Modern Philosophic Skepticism Examined. By the late Reverend R. Main, VFRS, VPRAS, The Radcliffe Observer. 39 On Antiha Priets Runst Kadnalam Nagtuir Ge.Lism B.Y The Reverend by the Isaac Taylor, M.A. Reverend J. McDougall. On the Sorrows of Skepticism. By Reverend R. Thornton, D.D. Vice Prose, see Parts 6, 15, 33. On Heathen Cosmogonies, Compared with the Hebrew. By Reverend B. W. Savie, M.A. On the Place of Science in Education. By Professor H. A. Nicholson, M.D. 40. I. On Egypt and the Bible. By J. E. Howard, Esq, FRS Vol. 1141. The Flint Implements of Brixham Cavern. By N. Whitley, Esq, photographically illustrated. On Antxhemifilnianchio and Ryokfu Lt Terhel Implements of America. Unseen Universe. Reverend by Dr. J. W. Dawson, Preb. Irons, D.D. FRS, 1876-7. The Uncertainties of Modern Physical Science. By Professor Birks. The Ethics of Belief. By Professor H. Wage, M.A., 1876-7. 42 On the Metaphysics of Scripture. By Professor Shallis, M.A., FRS, FRAS. On the Theory of Unconscious Intelligence as Opposed to Theism. By Professor Morris, USA. On the Myth of R.A. By W. R. Cooper, ESQ, FRAS, MRAS, Secretary SOC Bib Arch. On Christianity as a Moral Power. By Professor Lias, St. David's College, Lampeter. 43 On the Structure of Geological Formations as Evidence of Design. By D. Howard, FCS. On the Bible and Modern Astronomy. By Professor Burks, Cam. 44 On Comparative Psychology. By E. J. Mooreshead, ESQ Vol. 1245. On the Indestructibility of Matter. By Reverend Professor Shallis, M.A., FRS, FRAS. On History in the Time of Abraham, illustrated by recent researches. By Reverend H. G. Tompkins. With numerous notes by various Assyriologists. On the Horus myth. By W. R. Cooper, ESQ, FRAS, MRAS, Secretary SOC Bib Arch, illustrated. Additional papers by various Egyptologists. 1875-6, The Influence of True and False Philosophy. An address. J. E. Howard, ESQ, FRS. The History of the Alphabet. By Reverend Isaac Taylor, M.A. Creation and Providence. By J. E. Howard, ESQ, FRS Nature's Limits, An Argument for Theism. By S. R. Pattison, ESQ, FGS Mr. Matthew Arnold and Modern Culture. Professor Lias, St. David Coll., Lampeter. On the Relation of Scientific Thought Monotheism. By the Reverend Dr. Rule to Religion. Author of Tarayarnet al-Dsbis.hopcotteril, D.D. Physical Geography of the East. By Professor J. L. Porter, D.D., Doctor of Laws __, Volume 12 * published in January 1879. Note from the 1879 Report as to the People's Editions. A People's Edition of some few papers has been issued, it is much used by lecturers, and its lectures. Popularity is very encouraging. In many places, at home and abroad, the papers in the journal continue to be used, both by members and non-members, as the basis of lectures, and several letters have been most active and received popular commending them as being lecturing member rights, J. Asudit Holhoad were needed. One them I should be unable to give my lectures, another says, had it not been for the publications of the Institute I should never have read a paper on such a subject. In this case the audience, a metropolitan one, among whom were 300 clergymen, requested the publication of the lecture. The works of reference in the library are also utilized by members giving lectures, and every effort is made with a view of rendering the organization of the Institute as useful as possible. Uberfiv, FE62T989 LDUC Berkeley Libraries E3J /IA